Welcome to the broadcast. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. What a waste of a catchphrase. This channel is just a waste of a channel, isn't it? Now it has been. Used to be a good. Having to fucking reconnect as soon as I start a broadcast, huh? Anyways, this used to be a good channel before I had my little nervous breakdown. Or before I'm losing more and more motivation to fucking live every day. Haven't been really dwelling on suicidal thoughts too much, but I just don't feel motivated to do fucking anything. It's like everything just seems so fucking pointless. But I'm trying to adjust to these new medications, or this mainly the new antidepressant that I'm on. Effects are hoping it'll start making me feel like a motivated, normal person again sometime soon. But slow going, I guess. It's going to be difficult to be streaming. Today's, I'm going to ask them to check the Freon again. But, yeah, so just going to be listening to the news and I guess trying to get some more sleep. I don't know. I don't know what the fuck to do with myself. I appreciate anybody who watches these broadcasts and clicks the like button and hangs out with me in chat. You're helping a wounded soul who's going through a whole lot survive with just a little bit less misery. It's nice knowing that people care. And knowing that people care is pretty much the only thing that's keeping me going. So, thanks everybody who watches. Thanks. And now it's time for Morning Joe. To start off. That's funny. MSNBC's actual channel didn't get a fucking ad, but the side uploader got an ad.
It's not the time for name calling. Trying to use the station, obviously, to himself and the president. But no, I haven't heard him privately or publicly say a disparaging word about fellow Democrats. Biden did go after Trump and sort of set the narrative for his campaign, and some of the other Democrats followed suit. You don't think he said Ford will do that?
That is a picture. That's not a sign. Something about like Meek is always right or something like that.
Something about marriage where the wife is always right. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. There are general reminders of that now throughout my house. But certainly not drawing my little congressional campaign in comparison with any presidential campaign. But what I did is I started 18 months early. And when people asked why I started so early, I said because I'm going to screw up for the first 6 months, but nobody's going to see it. Nobody's going to notice. And by the time everybody starts noticing, I'm going to be a year into the campaign. Mm-hmm. And Beto still has 6, 7 months. All of these candidates still have 6 or 7 months. What you want to see from a leader is the ability to adjust to problems, the ability to adjust to hardships, and be agile enough to move forward. I've told this story before. It's been a long time. But you remember in late 2007, we were tearing John McCain's campaign to shreds. I'm leaving Pensacola. As I'm leaving my parents' house, my dad says, "Don't you forget John McCain. You keep an eye on John McCain. He'll be back." John McCain adjusted. He had this massive operation. Then he started flying commercial, started flying in coach. He had 2, 3, 4, 5 people, and he rebuilt his campaign from the ground up. That's what you want to see on a candidate. That's what you want to see in a politician. That's what you want to see in a leader, where they make a mistake and are agile enough to adjust on the fly with the whole world looking at it. I'm not saying that Beto's going to win. I'm not going to say that he's going to finish at the top, but we'll see. But it's early.
Yeah, I just think that there's no time for regrouping and for trying to see, you know, how you messed up your campaign along the way. I mean, this is a different situation we're in. And if you look at Pete Buttigieg, everything he does is pitch perfect. It's laser focused. It's right on target in terms of tone, dynamic, message, everything. And that matters. That's why he's standing out. I kind of feel like being a Democrat, potentially running against Trump this time around, is like being a woman in TV news trying to break through. You have to be perfect. And then everything else comes with it. There's no time to mess up, because they'll move on and take another. There's no time to be figuring out whether or not you're apologetic about being, you know, a white man or not. It's so strange. There's no time for this.
You know, it's the second inning.
Yeah.
It's the second inning, Elise, and I know, Elise, that you and Mika love my baseball analogies.
Now we just
the last 2 games I've been to at Fenway, Rick Porcello gave up 4 runs in the first inning, and then yesterday he gave up 3 runs, and then he calmed down. And I mean, this is a 9-inning game. We are in the second inning, Mika.
Yeah.
No, I'm not generous. It doesn't. Listen, I will tell you one other thing, Elise, that people always told me when I was a young campaigner, that Americans don't focus until the last 10 days. And guess what? Americans don't focus until the last 10 days. If 2 weeks mattered, Newt Gingrich would have won Iowa back in 2012. Newt Gingrich would have won Florida in 2012. People focus in the last 10 days.
Well, Joe, and it is so early, and I really had discounted Beto to a large extent after the political malpractice of his decision to go on the cover of Vanity Fair, a publication I love, but I wouldn't have exactly, as a political advisor, encouraged a candidate to pursue. Then I noticed that Beto was attracting some really top-flight talent, and Democratic operatives were being pulled to his campaign, Jen O'Malley Dillon, and I thought, if these people in this crowded field are committing to Beto, they're seeing something that's there. And so I guess my question, to build on that, what's the natural enthusiasm like at these rallies? Are the crowds coming out? Are they? Because I know that
it looks like he's going great guns.
Mm.
And see him, as I say, sliding in polls and just not doing it nationally. You know, it's time for a change too. But people like Jen O'Malley Dillon know all this, and he's hired some other Obama veterans who, you know, delegate counters, delegate specialists, and they've got an excellent digital fundraising operation. They raised $80 million for the Senate race, all-time record for the Senate. I think he's in it for a while, and I don't know if it's the second inning, but it's early days yet.
You know, Willie, you look at John Heilman, first of all, I agree with what John says about Beto right now, and that is nobody has a higher ceiling than Beto. He started big, he collapsed.
If anybody got a
But
notification.
again, it's as long as they keep doing
If
what they're
anybody even
doing,
cares
which is what
anymore.
Barack Obama did in the summer of 2007 when
Guess
Hillary
I blame
Clinton was
people for
still,
not caring at this point.
expected to do well. Obama was investing in the ground game. Obama was doing the ground game. They were building up the people that would carry them to victory when people started focusing the last 10 days. Again, I'm not here to say that Beto's
I'm literally
even
just
make it
waiting
to
for people
Iowa.
to
I
chat
don't
with,
know.
that's all.
But he's on the right track now.
And there are a lot of smart people, some of them who have won presidential elections within the last decade, who will tell you privately
So
and off
fucking
camera,
depressed.
don't count out Beto. They believe in who he's staffed up with. They believe in his ability to raise money. They say don't count Beto out. I do agree with you, Mika, though. There's a visceral thing in the country right now where people say, I'm not looking for somebody who's been on a journey of self-discovery,
Yeah.
who's going on road trips and
Wish I
blogging. I
could,
need
yeah.
somebody to stand up to the President of the United States.
They're just looking for a gut reaction to a
Yeah.
candidate, not to deeply think about it. The piece is in the new issue of the New Yorker. William Finnegan,
You're
thank
so
you so
tough,
much.
Mika.
I'm not
By the way,
tough. We don't have time to, like, you know.
No, you were so
Welcome,
tough.
viewer.
Did
Thanks for
you
joining me.
not care about my journey?
Say hello in the chat if you don't mind.
I care about your journey.
By the way, let's look at the cover of the New Yorker.
Or
I've
don't.
decided I'm going to give this to Catherine for her birthday. I'm going to frame this cover. What a wonderful, we showed it last week, but what a wonderful cover. They call it The Shining.
Gosh, Lindsay, come on, man. Tonight on MSNBC, Lawrence O'Donnell will have a live town hall in South Carolina with 2020 presidential candidate Senator Kamala Harris. Watch The Last Word tonight at 10 p.m. right here on MSNBC. And still talking about even just, you know, marijuana and how the industry has really kind of pushed it now at this point on people who think it's great for them. And I stand still on the category of people who don't think so.
Well, you know, it's fascinating. First of all, Michael, I saw your book in the newsroom. I picked it up, ran on the plane, and they said, oh, well, good. You know, Mika's really into this self-improvement, and I'm trying to be a more sensitive man. I'm going to read this book on mindfulness and radical acceptance.
That's good.
Wow, was I surprised. You know, there's so many things to talk about here. First of all, the first thing that struck me, I'm a huge Beatles fan, and I remember listening to John Lennon and Paul McCartney in the 1960s saying that LSD brought them closer to God. And I was like, oh, man, come on. And Billy Graham, everybody else obviously freaking out. I was shocked reading your book, looking at what was it, 2006 Johns Hopkins study, where even atheists who were terminal would leave their body in these psychedelic trips. And my favorite quote was the atheist who was asked, how did it make you feel? And she said, well, I hate to say this, I'm an atheist. It brought me closer to God and made me realize that there was more out there. Explain that, if you can, to our viewers.
Well, people on a high-dose psychedelic trip, which is being used in a therapeutic context now, usually with psilocybin or magic mushrooms, about 80% of the time have a so-called mystical experience, where they feel like their sense of self is dissolving and they're merging with something larger, which some people interpret as a divinity. She was an interesting character because she had she told me, and I kissed the face of God. And I said, wait a minute, you told me you're an atheist. How can you kiss the face of God? And she said, we just don't have a word big enough for what I felt. God is the biggest word we have. So I did see lots of people having a transformative spiritual experience, which certainly piqued my curiosity.
You know, what's so interesting, and Mika, I was actually having this discussion with a family member yesterday, and it's fascinating that you're here today, but I had read Malcolm Gladwell's article on medicinal marijuana from the New Yorker, and Gladwell said, everything we've heard about the medicinal effects of marijuana right now are inconclusive. You name it, it's inconclusive. It's quite frankly, it's pseudoscience. How odd that pot, which we've grown to accept as a mainstream drug, is being oversold, while actually in science labs, and I want to underline this for everybody watching, in a medical setting, that these psychedelics actually do help people who are terminal, help people with certain psychiatric
Depression, anxiety,
depression, anxiety,
disorder. Yeah, you know, it's interesting. There's much more science, mainstream science, about psychedelics than there ever has been about cannabis. And yet cannabis has been approved because it's regarded as a medicine. The reason for that is, first of all, I think psychedelics are a much more powerful medicine than cannabis and can do more for people with mental disorders. But also the government made it very hard to study cannabis. you had to use their pot, which they grew on a farm in Mississippi, and they've been growing it the same way since the 1970s. It's just not very good. And they put many barriers in the way. And the reason was that cannabis was very important to the drug war. You didn't have a big drug war without all these cannabis crimes. Psychedelics is a much smaller percentage of the, of the pie in terms of drugs, of illicit drugs. And beginning in the late 90s, the FDA decided we're going to let people study psychedelics, psilocybin in particular, because it's less controversial than LSD. It could have been LSD. And so they've allowed some very good science to be done in places like NYU, Johns Hopkins, UCLA, I mean, mainstream medical institutions. And now we have a substantial body of science that suggests that this may be a very important psychiatric medicine used in this context.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. You probably know my friend Rick Doblin, who runs the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and has been involved in funding a lot of this research.
He's been a pioneer,
For PTSD, talk about this a little bit. I think for both terminal patients and for soldiers with PTSD, on both psilocybin and on MDMA, on ecstasy, these are the things where there's a lot of evidence, and there are a lot of people who really are in pain and really need help and are getting it from these drugs.
Yeah, so MDMA or ecstasy is, some people consider it a psychedelic. Rick does, may or may not be, works on a set of brain receptors. But it has proven already in phase 2 FDA trials to be very effective in treating PTSD. What it seems to do is lower the fear response, the amygdala, so that you can bring out these traumatic memories, deal with them without freaking out, without having the emotional charge that usually accompanies them. Talk to a therapist about it. And then when you put those memories away, they've lost a lot of their charge.
Yeah.
And, we have very little to treat PTSD that works.
The book is How to Change Your Mind, what the new science of the George W. Bush White House and State Department's Elise Jordan, President of the Council on Foreign Relations Richard Haas, and political reporter for the Washington Post and MSNBC political analyst Robert Costa. Hope everyone had a great weekend. Let's talk about President Trump's weekend, because he's on his way back to Washington this morning after spending the Memorial Day weekend in Japan. There, he met with U.S. troops and also downplayed the recent missile test by North Korea. During the course of his visit, Trump suggested that he was not personally bothered by the short-range missile test carried out by Pyongyang earlier this month. In a tweet on Saturday, the president wrote, "North Korea fired off some small weapons which disturbed some of my people and others, but not me. I have confidence that Chairman Kim will keep his promise," and also smiled when he called Swamp Man Joe Biden, spelled wrong, a low IQ individual and worse. Perhaps that's sending me a signal? The president initially spelled Biden's name wrong, but corrected it in a follow-up tweet. The president made that claim despite the fact that those kind of missiles pose a potential security threat to U.S. allies in the region, including Japan. During a press conference yesterday following hours of talk between the two leaders, Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, standing next to Trump, disagreed with the president's assessment of the missile tests, saying it violated UN Security Council resolutions.
Welcome, viewer.
It must have been really hot in there. Offered this.
Thanks for joining me. Feel free to say hello in the chats.
My people think it could
I'm just
have been
battling my
appreciation.
depression today.
I view it differently. I
As
view it
usual.
a man, perhaps he wants to get attention. And perhaps
Don't want to
not.
fucking be awake.
It
Don't want to be
doesn't matter.
alive,
All I
but
know
I don't
is
know.
that there have been no nuclear tests. There have been no ballistic missiles going
Really?
out. There have been no long-range
What's
missiles
the point
going
of
out.
fucking clicking on
And
something
I
like
think
this
that
if you don't even
someday
feel like
we'll have a deal. I'm not in a rush.
watching?
Tremendous sanctions being put on
It's not like it's a big surprise.
North Korea, and again, Kim Jong-un understands
Fucking
the
depressed guy on a couch listening to the news.
potential that country has.
All right, Joe, what do you think?
Well, I don't really understand. I don't understand, first of all, why you would say that the missiles cause you no concern when you're actually in a country, one of our closest allies, that these missiles pose a direct threat to. That's, of course, disturbing. I'm going to ask Richard Haas about that. But secondly, of course, we talk talking about Donald Trump shattering the norms of the presidency, shattering the norms of democratic values, of American values as a leader. What is more shattering of those norms than when you have the President of the United States actually saying that he was smiling at the fact that the communist dictator of a country that's long been an enemy of the United States of America was sending him a secret signal by attacking a domestic political opponent. That is, of course, shatters democratic norms. It's also very dangerous, and it's what he did 4 years ago when he tried to talk directly to Russia and told them to try to get Hillary Clinton's emails. But Richard Haas, everybody knows this about Donald Trump by now, but we have to restate it. Let's talk about the bigger picture here. Is there a bigger picture? Does Donald Trump, is he working towards a deal that we don't know about? Is that why he's ignoring the North Koreans rubbing his nose in mud, it seems, seemingly every month?
Well, if he's working towards a deal, as you say, it's a deal we don't know about. He basically said he wants denuclearization. That is not going to happen. I think the odds of it happening are about zero. He probably could have a deal, Joe, if he's willing to compromise that we would give North Korea some sanctions relief in exchange for some degree of limits, presumably verified. But in the meantime, the president keeps saying he's not in a rush. And he ought to be a little bit in a rush. The kind of test North Korea did the other day is a way they can learn certain things that then could be introduced into longer range missiles.
So let me ask you this, Richard. On China, there's an example of the president bumbling his way through on China. But if you look at it from 30,000 feet, most Americans are glad the president's getting tough on China. Finally, a president is getting tough on China, even though he has no game plan. He's a day trader, so it's going to end badly. But his instinct there is right. What about on North Korea, where we were talking about the possibility of war a year ago? Is his instinct not right on North Korea to try, first of all, to ignore John Bolton and other people who would love to go to war on the Korean Peninsula? But are his instincts correct to play this out, to continue to give them a little more slack? And
he's not particularly concerned about these shorter range systems. Well, obviously Japan is, because they would reach Japan, and it sends a powerful message that if North Korea were willing to cut a deal where, for example, it limited some of its long-range systems that made us happy, he would be willing to throw North Korea, be willing to throw South Korea or Japan under the bus. It reinforces the sense that allies are not a concern for him. So again, I think there is potentially a deal to be had out there, one that would be consistent with our ally and our own interests, but I don't see the president so far willing to take it.
As President Trump praised Kim Jong-un, he continued his criticism of potential 2020 opponent Joe Biden during a news conference yesterday, where the president was asked about his attacks on the former vice president.
Does it give you pause at all to be appearing to side with a brutal dictator instead of with a fellow American, the former Vice President Joe Biden?
Well, Kim Jong-un made a statement that Joe Biden is a low IQ individual. He probably is, based on his record. I think I agree with him on that.
But in terms of criticism that you're sort of supporting a dictator instead of an American vice president?
Well, when I look at what's been done by our vice president and the president, when I look at the horrible Iran deal that they made, look what happened since I terminated the Iran deal. Look what has happened to Iran. Iran, when I first came into office, was a terror. They were fighting in many locations all over the Middle East. They were behind every single major attack, whether it was Syria, whether it was Yemen, whether it was individual smaller areas, whether it was taking away oil from people. They were involved with everything. Now they're pulling back because they've got serious economic problems. I can tell you that Joe Biden was a disaster. His administration with President Obama, they were basically a disaster when it came to so many things, whether it was economy, whether it was military defense, no matter what it was, they had a lot of problems. So I'm not a fan.
You know, Willie, it bears repeating and reminding our viewers that the Dixie Chicks' career was shattered on country music stations across America. There were Dixie Chick album burnings. There were Dixie Chick guns because they spoke ill of an American president on foreign soil. This is how far we've come. We now have a president who is supported by a lot of those people who probably said, I'm not ever going to listen to Dixie Chicks again, who attacked an American vice president and an American president on foreign soil. That is something you do not do. I remember lashing into Harry Reid for 5 years for attacking George W. Bush when he was in Russia. It's something you don't do.
And not just attacking a former vice president, but doing it as a contrast to the dictator of North Korea. In other words, he's choosing the North Korean dictator over the former vice president of the United States. And at least, let's remind people, if for President Trump it's not enough that Kim Jong-un starves and murders his people and then he threatens our allies with nuclear weapons, less than 2 years ago, he murdered an American college student. He murdered a young American man. This person that the President of the United States is taking aside over the Vice President of the United States. This is one of those things, again, where we get numb to the President sometimes. We don't have to be surprised, but we ought to be outraged by what we saw over the weekend.
Well, I'm just concerned that every norm in how we behave at home and abroad has just been thrown out the window, and we expect that, oh, the American president can behave like this, and it'll just be excused because that's who he is, and we're not supposed to be any better than that. And he just gets out on the international stage and is blatantly lying about so many things. Number one, the nuclear deal with Iran, which did not, the Obama administration did not say, oh, you can have nukes like Donald Trump said in that press treatment, but I did in that press avail. But I just can't imagine being the Japanese and hosting Donald Trump and then just having him essentially stab you in the eye.
Bob Costa, I'm getting past at least this very violent Mississippi imagery there. So Bob, so the president obviously is focused on 2020. Everything has to do with 2020 race now. He's keyed in on Joe Biden. He even went after him, attacked him on the crime bill. Is there? I read that Stuart Stevens last night was suggesting that he's going to start attacking Joe Biden on the crime bill because he knows one of the reasons why he won was African American turnout was depressed for the first time in 20 years because Trump and the Russians were sending negative messages about Hillary to black voters. Is that something we're going to see over the next year or so, a constant hammering away on issues like the crime bill?
Stepping back and talking to Republican consultants across the country and Democratic consultants, they say that there's a pattern here with these attacks on Vice President Biden and what the president's doing over in Japan. Where is Biden's key political appeal in the industrial Midwest? Where is President Trump at this moment struggling to cut a deal? He's struggling to cut a deal with the Japanese. He has delayed the auto tariffs with the Japanese for 6 months. Did the same with the European Union. Still no U.S.-Japanese trade deal. A trade deal with China, he's whispering some positive words, so the markets are up today. Still no deal necessarily on the horizon. This is a White House, based on my conversations with Republican leaders, is worried about trade moving toward.
Wait, we're going to put a tariff on Japanese cars? Oh, for fuck's sake.
Large-hail damaging wind. They'll be forming in Ohio near Pittsburgh and then sliding towards Philadelphia this evening. We'll watch that even into New Jersey. And then this huge area that's been hit so many times this spring, from Kansas City to Tulsa, all the way down to Dallas is at risk. And because the water levels are so high in all the rivers, there's nowhere for it to go. So it pours, and then we get flash flooding. And we have a little low from the Quad Cities to Des Moines over to Peoria, and then a section there over there towards Wyoming, South Dakota, and where is western Nebraska. As far as the rainfall totals go, easily above 3 inches plus around Fort Smith. That's where I just showed you those pictures of the Arkansas River halfway up that house. And they're going to get another 3 inches of rain in the next 2 days. Can you imagine? This is not fair. And
what we were facing as a nation, he understood it. He knew because he knew this man more than any of us did.
Wow, what a fascinating story.
No, it is.
So how was that about?
And again, it's good to get that read on.
I hate it when they clip it
John
up like
McCain.
that.
I get the same read from him when I talked to you about when I went to the office, and and great insight. Insight a little different, Elise Jordan, from George W. Bush's timeless review of the speech, which still remains my favorite. And it's right. Let me tell you.
It's the second coming, and things fall apart. The center cannot hold.
So a new friend I just made just wound up homeless.
Far left parties, much smaller parties. And it was amazing. And say in Britain, the Conservative Party came in 5th place.
Nothing I can do to help.
And you see,
Because they haven't delivered on Brexit. It was really it was a big referendum on their failure to.
But what you see, what also suggests to me is how hard governing is going to be. I don't want to exaggerate the significance of the European Parliament, but imagine some of these things then get replicated at a national level. You have small parties, far right, far left. How is anybody in Europe going to be able to govern? The answer is they won't be able to govern. So this to me is a real signal of just how fragmented and polarized democratic politics around the world are becoming.
And it really is, Bob Costa, around the world. You can draw a line, straight line from Washington to Warsaw. You can look at other places that were freed of Soviet tyranny in 1989, whether you're talking about Hungary or Poland or other countries. So we had so much that we invested so much in. It does seem like a lot of European countries are taking the lead from Donald Trump, and Donald Trump also taking the lead from a lot of nationalist leaders overseas.
And you see that nationalism taking hold in Asia as well. Even Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has a nationalist strain to his governing style. Of course, Xi Jinping, the president of China. And just go back to Senator Klobuchar for a second. I was inside the Capitol covering that all from the stairway right where everyone walks out on that chilly day. And I remember speaking to Senator McCain, spoke to President George W. Bush. They both appeared alarmed. George W. Bush said to me at the time, when I said, "What do you think of the speech?" He said, "Good to see ya," and he walked away. And Senator McCain was alarmed and around. Yeah, but it's important to remember from that moment, as much as I saw President Bush and Senator McCain and others really appear alarmed by the president's address, you also saw so many Republicans in that statuary hall and in the stairs inside the Capitol going up to Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller and President Trump and politically embracing them and saying, "We're here to follow you. You have taken us to power. We are here to follow and to follow your lead." So that was the beginning as a reporter to see the Republican Party submit and say, "We are here under President Trump and to follow along." Most of them, not all.
Not all, but most of them. Richard, explain how nationalism, as described in the article, is an important concept, and how European leaders have to find that middle ground.
You're right there. Look, nationalism on one level can be healthy. It's a sense of identity. It's a sense of pride in country. When it goes too far, it really hunts out enemies, and it defines not so much what you are, but what you are not and what you are against. What Europe has always been really since the European project began after World War II is a balance between centralization, common rules coming out of Brussels, yet still national rules and national identities coming out of the nearly 30 member countries. And there's a tension. And I think what you saw with what Chancellor Merkel did in Germany, and essentially opening up the borders at the height, 8,000 people a day, Joe, were entering Germany. That would be the equivalent of over 30,000 people a day entering the United States. And it simply overloaded the circuits, not just in Germany, but everywhere else. And it brought to the fore this question of what's the right balance between capitals and Brussels. And I think that's being worked out. The article I think you may have also been referring to is bringing us back to the United States. And it's the argument that every country needs its own narrative. And here in the United States, we have lost our narrative. And what's happening is if we don't teach civics, we don't talk about the idea that we were founded on ideas, that this was not a country based on religion or race, but it was based upon openness as an idea of opportunity. Since we don't teach it, and since it's getting lost, then we've made ourselves vulnerable for all sorts of people, from Donald Trump to a lot of others, suggesting alternative narratives.
Coming up on Morning Joe, we'll remember the life and legacy of baseball great Bill Buckner. Plus, it's one of the sketches putting Dr. Seuss in a whole new light. Nazis, fascists, and communists all going for a ride along with supporters of America First. We'll talk about the author's earlier career as a
They just get advertisements every single time.
Interview kids and listen to their voices and
MSNBC, the actual channel, not so much.
what happens in our future.
Journalism isn't just an after-school activity for you ladies. Is this your life's work?
I would definitely say it's some of the most meaningful work I've ever done. And just to tag on young people starting to care more, it's easy to say that not caring about politics or not wanting to be aware is a privilege. And at Parkland, a lot of us describe our community as a bubble. And after what happened, it just gave us all a first-hand experience that you have to care because your lives depend on it.
Thank you so much for your work. Congratulations on being here in New York today, and obviously the Pulitzer mentioned.
Welcome, viewer.
The Eagle Eyes reporting. Well, during the
Feel free to say hello in the chat.
In their book, We Say Never Again.
Or just disappear right away.
Talk about some extraordinary young people. That wraps us up this hour. I'm Stephanie Rule. I'll see you again at 1 p.m. with Ali Velshi.
He was seemingly preoccupied with the possible 2020 rival, Joe Biden, the former vice president. He kicked off this trip with that tweet about Biden initially, and then doubled down on it, essentially. Did not back away from it in a news conference.
Trying to find my motivation.
That has drawn some backlash from not just Democrats, like Mayor Pete Buttigieg, for example,
for life
but
in
from
general.
Republicans. Congressman Adam Kinzinger, Congressman Pete King, for example, overnight tweeted about this as well, essentially slamming the president for seeming to side with the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un over the former vice president and American citizen, obviously. This is something
But they sure like to talk about the same thing over and over again, don't they?
Jeff Mason, a friend of this show, by the way, who asked the president specifically about that. Watch.
I can tell you that Joe Biden was a disaster. His administration, President Obama.
Hello.
They were basically a disaster when it came to so many things, whether it was economy, whether it was military defense, no matter what it was, they had a lot of problems. So I'm not a fan.
So what is that about? There are some raising the question of why is it that Donald Trump, even here in Tokyo, as he has had 4 days with a close friend, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan, has the president been tweeting so much and talking so much about Joe Biden? Is it because Biden is in his head ahead of the 2020 election? We know that folks in and around the White House, folks close to President Trump, do believe that Biden is a formidable threat to the president if he were to make it through the Democratic primary, and that is still a big if. We should also note here, you mentioned
what's going on with you?
Yeah, very sharp split, not just with any key U.S. ally, but with his host here in Japan, Shinzo Abe. President Trump dismissing the idea that North Korea's recent missile tests violate the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe did not dismiss that. Neighboring Japan, of course, concerned about these missile tests. Even the president's own top aide, National Security Advisor John Bolton, had some daylight, a lot of daylight with the president on this one, Jeff.
That's a great point. Let's bring in our panel now because, Betsy, I want to read for you the big headlines coming out of this trip. You have Politico. Trump finds himself increasingly alone on North Korea. The New York Times. Japan rolled out the red carpet. Trump veered off into personal fixations. And then there's this from the Washington Post. Still angling for a deal. Trump backs Kim Jong-un over Biden, Bolton, and Japan. So, Betsy, it's hard to see how this is what the White House was hoping to get out of this trip.
The central fact that helps make sense of the way President Trump talks about Kim Jong-un is that he organizes his foreign policy in large part based on the personal relationships that he has with foreign heads of state. Trump believes that Kim Jong-un likes him. He believes the two of them have a rapport, and he believes that
well, thanks for hanging out, whoever you are.
Relationship could lay the foundation for a legacy item in his presidency. However, it's not something that the people around him put a particularly high level of confidence in, and that's where we get sort of this bifurcation within the White House, within the Trump administration, and between Trump and our key allies, including Japan. While Trump himself seems to have great faith in his personal rapport with Kim Jong-un, that faith is not widely shared whatsoever. And that's the reason for sort of this strange and apparently perplexing tension when it comes to the North Korean issue.
Right, and Betsy, could it be that the president is also trying to preserve his talking point heading into 2020, that his big gambit on North Korea worked?
For sure, there's no question. We know that Trump views himself as the consummate deal maker. He thinks that he can negotiate deals where nobody else was able to. He takes great personal pride in the fact that he may be able to get some sort of progress on denuclearization that his predecessors were were not able to get. This is really personally important to him, and that's part of the reason that he's treating this issue in a way that generates so much head scratching in other quarters.
Eugene, let's talk about Joe Biden, because the former VP, he didn't respond to any of the president's remarks or tweets, but some of his Democratic rivals defended him instead, including Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Take a look at this.
Jong-un is a murderous dictator, and Vice President Biden served this country honorably. It's just one more example, though, of the way that this president tries to draw attention to himself by saying things that shock the conscience.
So, Eugene, what's your take on all of this?
Well, I think someone like Pete Buttigieg, who has foreign policy experience, considering his time abroad in military involvement and other academic pursuits, is trying to paint a perspective for the people who are considering him as well as Joe Biden. And we know that quite a few of these individuals are people who tried Trump in 2016 and perhaps are looking for another alternative. And they want to make sure that these individuals know that what they could be doing in backing Trump for a second time could make things even more difficult for America in terms of foreign policy, and make things difficult for America in terms of its relationships with other countries, not even involved in the conversations between Japan, North Korea, and the U.S. I think what ultimately President Trump is doing is really hurting himself.
Multi-billion-dollar disaster that we're in the middle of and not over yet. I mean, it's like, yes, we can't even add up at this point how many houses have been lost between the tornadoes and the flooding. And the flooding is going to be astronomical. It's not done yet. So let me get into a little bit of it. And let's recap first what happened last night. 51 tornado reports. The one we just showed you where Gabe was standing was right here near Dayton. That was what went through about 10 to 11 o'clock last night. But there were 51 tornadoes yesterday, and we could be something similar today. The one that went through Dayton that destroyed that elementary school, which, you think, the end of this school year, no way, but they may not even get back into that school in time for next school year. This is the tornado. You can see it right here. Here's the little V notch down in here. They call this like a stovepipe tornado. And I've seen some of those trees where the leaves were just stripped, the branches were stripped off. The only thing that was left was the trunk and some of the main stems of the tree. Usually that's like an EF3 or EF4. The tornado scale goes from 0 to 5, 5 being the strongest. So this was a pretty strong one. So for today, we just got the new update for the severe weather expected today. In the Northeast, watch out. Pittsburgh all the way through Harrisburg to Philadelphia to New York City, all the way back down to Baltimore, almost to Washington, D.C. We could even see an isolated tornado or two. 28 million people at risk. And then we'll come back in the Midwest. We now are up to moderate risk. There's a good chance that not only tornadoes, but strong tornadoes in areas from Kansas City to St. Joseph here, from Columbia northwards up into southern portions of Iowa. We can watch this closely later on this evening. 20 million people at risk in this area here. So in total, we're up to like 44 million people in about 14 different states just for today alone. And of course, we get all these thunderstorms. We're going to get more rain too. And then tomorrow, we do it again from Dallas to Fort Worth, all the way over through Fort Smith. The Fort Smith area in Tulsa has been hit so hard with all the river flooding. Day after day of thunderstorms that making things worse. Here's your flash flood alert. 6 million people at this. And Jeff, I'll leave it with this map. This map here shows us all the major rivers that are having a considerable record or close to record flood stage, including the Mississippi, the Missouri, the Arkansas, and the Illinois River here. This map shows us another 3 to 6 inches of rainfall on top of those rivers. And so it's a nightmare scenario. Yeah. The dams can't hold any more water. Levees are going to start failing. There's no end in sight. Bill Karras, thank you. And Gabe Gutierrez in Ohio, thanks to you both.
We've got some breaking news for you now out of the Supreme Court, where the justices have addressed the issue of abortion. NBC Justice correspondent Pete Williams is at the court. Pete, what's this about?
This involves an Indiana law passed in 2016 and signed by Mike Pence when he was then the governor. The Supreme Court upheld part of it today, but invalidated part of it, or at least left the lower court rulings that invalidated part of it. The Supreme Court's action today allows the law to take effect that deals with the remains, how remains of fetal tissue are disposed of. The state law says they can't be disposed of like medical waste. They have to be treated like any other person, cremated or buried. The second provision, that provision of the law will go into effect. The second provision would have prohibited abortions when a woman is told by her doctor that it's a virtual certainty that her child would have some severe disability or Down syndrome. That part of the law is invalidated. Planned Parenthood had said if it had gone into effect, it would basically compel a woman to deliver a child when it was likely to die in infancy. So a split decision, part of the law upheld, part of it struck down. Back to you.
Pete Williams at the Supreme Court, thank you for that. Still a lot more to cover this morning, including the president suddenly reviling out the former VP on an issue that's likely to come up today. Biden's role in passing the 1994 crime bill. The president tweeting, anyone associated with the 1994 crime bill will not have a chance of being elected. I, on the other hand, was responsible for criminal justice reform, which had tremendous support. The president adding, super predator was the term associated with the bill that Sleepy Joe Biden, that's the president's nickname for the former VP, was so heavily involved in passing. But has Sleepy Joe apologized? No. Biden, who chaired the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time, did play a central role in getting that bill passed. But he defended himself at a campaign stop in New Hampshire earlier this month.
This idea that the crime bill generated mass incarceration. It did not generate mass incarceration.
All right, joining me now is MSNBC's Garrett Hake in Houston ahead of Biden's town hall, NBC News national political reporter Jonathan Allen, and MSNBC legal analyst Paul Butler, author of Chokehold, Policing Black Men. So Garrett, let's start with you, because look, no surprise the president is taking a swipe at Joe Biden, because people close to the president have been saying for months that Biden is the one candidate who has him worried. So how is the Biden camp responding to this? Because it looks like they're trying to avoid taking the bait from Trump.
Yeah, so far that's been the case, Jeff, especially with the president overseas. The Biden campaign still largely hewing to that old adage here that politics stops at the water's edge. They don't want to mix it up with the president over this, even if the president wants to mix it up with them, although there has been one response in the form of a tweet from Biden's senior advisor Simone Sanders, who wrote in part, to watch Trump take credit for the first step of many criminal reforms when, one, other folks actually did the work for the bill, and two, he's still on the record disparaging the Central Park 5 is exhausting and disingenuous. Trump lives far from the truth. There is so much to unpack about that First Step Act and the the Justice Reform Bill, rather, of 1994. The mixed messages and sides being involved in all this. Bernie Sanders, for example, supported that same crime bill, as did Mitch McConnell. And on the criminal justice reform, Cory Booker's got as much credit to claim there as does Donald Trump. So the whole tweet back and forth here is a bit of a wash. And what Jeff, well, I don't think
welcome back, viewer, or welcome if you're a new person.
There is also something to be said for being the campaign that gets attacked by the president in this way at this stage of a Democratic
Still nobody's chat.
The president is not going after Seth Moulton or Tim Ryan or Tulsi Gabbard. He's going after Joe Biden, who appears to be living in his head even when he is in Tokyo. And in a crowded Democratic primary, that has some value.
Yeah, that's a great point, Garrett. And look, as we talk about the politics of this bill, let's talk about what was actually in it. Because look, the 1994 crime bill had this, and it had 3 strikes, mandatory life sentence for repeat offenders. It included funding to hire 100,000 additional police officers and funding to build more prisons. So Paul Butler, former President Bill Clinton, well, he's apologized for signing the crime bill into law. He said he made the problem worse. The problem being the mass incarceration, especially among African Americans. So Clinton apologized. Should Biden do the same, or should he just say, look, this was something that happened 25 years ago?
Well, we know that it was responsible partly for one of the most dramatic expansions of a prison population in history. The crime bill gave states cash money. It had financial incentives. If states passed, we know that hasn't made families better off or communities safer, which is why President Clinton apologized for his role with regard to the crime bill.
Hey, John Allen, here's something that I think you know, because I've been following your Twitter feed about all of this. You had some great insight about this crime bill. And look, here are the lawmakers who are still in Congress who voted for the bill. You've got Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Dianne Feinstein, Patrick Leahy, Chuck Grassley, and Mitch McConnell. Bernie Sanders, obviously another 2020 Democrat on that list. How big of a problem will this be for Bernie Sanders? And we're talking about Joe Biden. But what about for Sanders?
I mean, the messaging is difficult for Sanders because they want to make the point that Joe Biden was the author of this crime bill and had a different place on this crime bill than Sanders did, but Sanders voted for it. So with regard to Sanders, Sanders went to the floor and warned against some of the things that you ended up seeing in the crime bill and reluctantly voted for it. Joe Biden drove the train on this thing. It was interesting to hear that clip earlier with Biden saying that the crime bill didn't generate mass incarceration because in 1994, just a few feet from where I'm standing on the Senate floor, Joe Biden said that his attitude toward Richard Nixon talking about law and order in the 70s was lock the SOBs up. He went to the Senate floor and bragged about how many more new instances of the death penalty were in the crime bill, how many new state prison cells would be built as a result of it. I think he's going to go back and argue and say, look, incarceration was growing, there was more crime going on before the crime bill, they were just building more jail cells, but the truth is, if you look at the jail over time, there was huge mass incarceration after the crime bill, and it's very easy to track to the provisions of it.
Hey, Paul Butler, the president's trying to put Joe Biden on the defensive here, but in the past, President Trump himself has advocated for tougher policing. I mean, here's what he told Larry King in 1989. This is a few years before the crime bill became law.
I'm also in favor of bringing back police forces that can do something instead of just turning their back, because every quality lawyer that represents people that are in trouble said the first thing they do is start shouting police brutality, etc.
So those are the president's comments on policing, but when it comes to the president's comments on race, you've got him promoting the lie of birtherism, you've got his comments about Charlottesville, his attacks on NFL players kneeling during the national anthem, now apparently keeping Harriet Tubman off the $20 bill. So it would appear that there's a stunning lack of self-awareness on the president's part, Paul.
Yeah, Trump has way more baggage than Biden does on this issue. We can think about him taking out those full-page ads in New York City tabloids calling for the execution of the Central Park Five, who were later exonerated, found not to be guilty. And so, you know, everybody's got issues from back in the day with where they were on criminal justice, but Trump has way more issues than most others.
All right, Garrett Hank, Jonathan Allen, and Paul Butler, my thanks to each of you. And a reminder that MSNBC's Road Warriors and all of the Democratic contenders will soon head to Miami for the first Democratic candidate debate of the 2020 election, only on MSNBC, NBC, and Telemundo. Just ahead, why a Democrat could be the latest to usher in the new abortion restriction hitting the country, plus the doctors on the front lines, at least for now. And also this morning, the Louisiana House is set to debate a bill that would ban abortions as early as 6 weeks into pregnancy. The bill was passed overwhelmingly by the Louisiana State Senate and the state's governor. A Democrat has already promised to sign it into law. Now, this is the latest in a string of similar anti-abortion measures introduced by state lawmakers across the country. 8 states have passed new laws limiting abortion this year alone, and more than a dozen others are considering legislation that would restrict the procedure. NBC's Stephanie Gosk joins me now with the latest on the Louisiana bill, along with Dr. John Torres, who went to Missouri to speak with 2 doctors who provided abortion services. And Stephanie, let's start with you. What exactly are the restrictions in this Louisiana bill?
Well, this is what's known as a heartbeat bill, and according to the legislation, at about 6 weeks, when a fetal heartbeat is heard, there can no longer be an abortion. But one of the things that's worth pointing out about these bans that we've seen go into effect is that actually they're not being enforced just yet. And the Louisiana bill falls into that category. And although when we were down there last week, we were told there's very little pushback against this, it's probably going to float through the House, but it's unlikely to get enforced because it's actually tied, specifically tied to a Mississippi law that is making its way through the federal courts, and there has already been a preliminary injunction against that. So none of it's being enforced here on the ground.
So explain that. Why is this law dependent on what's happening in Mississippi?
Well, that's because the legislators actually wrote that into this bill, and I was curious about that myself and talked to them. The reason is that actually when this is fought out in court, it gets really expensive, and they were going to lose support for this bill in Louisiana, even among Republicans in that state, because it's going to cost a lot of money to fight it. And what they've done is come up with this rather clever way of not having to pay for the legal battles. They're going to put it in Mississippi's hands, and Mississippi is already doing that right now.
Gotcha. And Dr. John, Missouri's governor signed an 8-week abortion ban into law late last week, and you spoke with the doctors at the state's last abortion provider. So what did they tell you?
So 2 of the 6 doctors that work at the nation at that state's last freestanding abortion clinic, and what they said is a lot of things. Like Stephanie said, one, the message they want to get out is even though I was sitting down with them at the time the governor signed the bill, and they weren't surprised that bill was getting signed because of all the history behind it, they also said it doesn't take effect till August. While we were there, constant phone calls, and the receptionist would just say, yes, we're still open, yes, we're still open, and so they want to get that message out. Number 2, they said that this is one of the things that they're doing because they have they really want to provide medical care for these women. They really want to make sure that they're taken care of. And I asked them, I said, you're going through protesters, you've had death threats against yourselves. Why are you still doing this? And here's what they had to say. ask the question, why do you do this?
I do it because it's the right thing to do. You know, I became a physician and specifically an OBGYN to serve reproductive age folks. And this is the most common medical intervention that a person in that age group will need. And to me, access to abortion care when you need it is so pivotal and essential to being able to fulfill all of the sort of different intersecting pieces of your life. It is so fundamental to being able to live your life and reach your full potential. I couldn't imagine not providing the care.
I spent 10 years getting to this point to provide that care. This is what I signed up for. I mean, you would never tell an astronaut who trained for 20 years to not go to space because it's dangerous. The fact is that I know how important this is for my patients to have access to care on their terms when they need it, and I want to be here to provide it under whatever the circumstances.
And are the doctors you spoke with, are they also concerned about how this legislation might affect women's other health issues?
They are, and one of the questions I asked them about preventive services, because that's what Planned Parenthood is very good at providing, they said the big concern is that that's going to impact that as well, and overwhelmingly, both of them said, this is a women's health issue to begin with, and so the fact that we're restricting this makes it an impact on their health just to begin with from the get-go, and so this could have long-term implications as well.
Stephanie Gosk and Dr. John Torres, thanks to you both. We appreciate it. One other piece of breaking news from the Supreme Court, our Pete Williams is reporting the High Court has declined an appeal of a pro-transgender bathroom policy in Pennsylvania. Now, that policy allows transgender high school students in one school district to use bathrooms and locker rooms that match their gender identity. Without comment, the Supreme Court...
Business, not the news business. They know as well. You and I both know, and so does Facebook. Pew did a survey in 2017 where 45% of the people said they get at least some of their news from Facebook, and you know that Facebook's advertising team certainly uses that data when they go out to get advertisers. I think it's a question of whether they're a media company or not. You know, I think about this a lot because the point they're trying to make is that they don't do journalism necessarily, but they're defining a media company in a very different way than we can define it today. And the question is, do we need to figure out a new way of talking about what a media company is? They sell advertising. That would be a media company. They're not exactly like a telco, which they think they're trying to act like they are. They're just the means that people get things, the distribution. And so the way I like to think about it is like, are they, you know, if you have a car in a bank robbery, the car is not really to blame because you can't indict all cars, but they're more like the gun. You know what I mean? And then when we do regulate, we try to regulate guns. We don't do it very well, but the idea is it's a very different tool. So what kind of tool is it? And that's really where you have to have the larger debate is what is Facebook? What is Twitter? Are they news vehicles? Are they distribution vehicles? Should they be completely left out of the loop and they're just sort of these benign platforms where all this bile goes over and they have no responsibility? It's a big debate we have to have in Congress and among citizens and with Facebook and Twitter and the others. So, Carol, let's say you're Sheryl Sandberg. Can you make this argument to me that it's the user's responsibility to figure out what is and isn't true? Anybody who uses the internet knows not everything online is real. That's right. I mean, I don't think it is, and I think what Facebook has done, even when they're doing that, when they're trying to do that, is inadequate. Additional reporting. Did they label it false? Did they determine it was false by their third-party fact checkers? Was it parody? Was it like, we don't know what it is, and they don't want to characterize it. And at the same time, they put labels on it that are wholly inadequate to the task. And so if they're going to do labels, do good labels. If they're going to like flag this stuff for readers and give us accurate information, give us accurate information. They don't want to do any of it. That's the problem. And so it's super vexing. They're either responsible for it, and if they're not responsible for it and they want to have some responsibility, carry out that responsibility. So it's just what they say that any given day, because some days they take stuff down just because they take it down based on very haphazard and confusing ways they do it. And so we're left with sort of this capricious attitude towards media that is problematic, as you know. But then what is a good label? Because it's one thing to clearly take down a doctored video or false facts, but then what do you do with disinformation that's kind of subtle, things that can be misinterpreted or divisive or politically biased? How do you create a consistent philosophy around that?
It's hard. It's going to be hard. But, there's some things, some people do say, let's take down one that's really egregious and it warns the others that we're watching. That's what law enforcement's about. They don't do, every time I go through a stop sign, not that I do, Stephanie, but I might, I have a possibility that I could get a ticket. I could get a lot of stuff. It doesn't mean every time someone goes through a stop sign, you get a ticket. It's this concept of policing the system in a way that definitely flags the most egregious users. And again, the rules are so haphazard that I've had lists of people have sent me stuff that's been taken down that isn't even close to as problematic as this is. So why did they take that down? They say public safety. Was it a public safety issue? They talk about inciting violence. Was that inciting violence? Anyway, it just is so confusing. And the fact of the matter is they're a private company, too. So there's no First Amendment issue here. There's no, when people cry censorship on Facebook, it's a private company. It doesn't have to. It can do whatever it wants. And I think what Facebook is taking advantage of is conflating free speech and censorship and this and that and profit making and acting like they're the government, not having the responsibilities of the government. Anyway, it's just a mess. It's a mess.
It's a mess, but does Facebook have a real problem here? Yes. Mark Zuckerberg can say, we made a mistake before, we're sorry.
Yeah.
Their advertising revenue isn't down. They're not getting killed on user growth. So besides you and I talking about this and them getting a whole lot of bad press, it's not like they're having a heavy hand of regulation smack them down.
Well, they might or might not. These things take a little time. I don't agree with you. I think that ultimately people will start to make determinations. You might not see it now. By the way, all innovation and all innovative companies go down, Stephanie. That's one thing that's absolutely clear. Remember AOL? No, you don't. Things in this very short history of the internet, there's been lots of companies, Yahoo, AOL, Netscape, that have been right at the top and then right at the bottom.
Yes, but Yara, those companies weren't impacting a presidential election. We have another one coming up in 2020. Do we have time?
Absolutely, and I think they have been trying in earnest. They have been trying to do things. I don't think they're sitting around saying what the hell. I don't think that's the case. I think what the issue is when these big things come up, when it's such a clear thing, they have to be more proactive about it. Is this parody? Is this not parody? Is this have a more fulsome discussion with people about what it is? If you look at what they have on there, it says additional reporting, and then there's a thing on there that doesn't make any sense, and it's just totally confusing. They've made it even more confusing. And so if they really do care about these things, they've got to spend a lot of time being extraordinarily clear about what they're doing. And so, all their, the dialogue box, why that? Why not say, this has been, by our third party, this has been deemed false. If they want to keep it up, we think it's false. They can even make a determination. We think this is terrible. I don't know. They could do anything. But watch it if you want. There's lots of ways to do it. I don't believe in necessarily pulling down everything, but I do believe if you have the responsibility for the platform to make sure things on the platform that are false or really problematic need to be looked at carefully.
Maybe Mark Zuckerberg needs to call you for advice, Karen.
No, I don't think so.
Thank you so much. I'm sure Mark has your number. All right, I have to take you to some breaking news from the Supreme Court on an abortion law. NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams. Pete, this is not one of these new laws. What's going on?
Right, this is a law that Indiana passed when Mike Pence was the governor. He signed it into law. It had two provisions, and the Supreme Court today upheld one of those provisions. This was a provision of state law that regulated and restricted how fetal remains were to be dealt with after an abortion. They could not be disposed of as medical waste, the state law said. They had to be either cremated or buried, dealt with like any other person. The lower courts invalidated that provision, but today the Supreme Court upheld that part of the law. So that is now upheld by the Supreme Court. The second part of the law restricted the circumstances in which a woman could seek an abortion. It barred abortion providers from doing abortions for basically parents who were expecting to have a Down syndrome child. The law was actually broader than that. It said you can't make abortion decisions based on sex, race, or disability selective abortions. And today the Supreme Court affirmed the lower court decision that invalidated that provision. What the Supreme Court's very brief decision on this says is we don't we're not going to take this case because only the Seventh Circuit has thus far addressed this kind of law. We follow our ordinary practice of denying these cases insofar as they raise legal issues that haven't been considered by other courts of appeal. So in other words, the Supreme Court is saying, in this area of the law, we generally don't take cases unless there's a split among the circuits. There really is only one circuit that's dealt with this. So this is a partial victory for opponents of abortion rights in Indiana.
So more restriction, less restriction, or they're not going to touch it?
More restriction in the sense that they upheld the part of the Indiana law that restricts how fetal remains are dealt with. They cannot be disposed of as medical waste, but they invalidated the part of the law that would make it harder to get an abortion in the first place.
All right, Pete, thank you so much. Fortune, certainly, of how the campaign is going to respond. I mean, at the very least, they can quickly remind the voting public it was President Trump who called for the Central Park 5 to face the death penalty. And remember, those gentlemen were exonerated.
Yeah, Stephanie, in fact, the Biden campaign has done just that, in part with a tweet from their senior advisor, Simone Sanders, who responded to the president, writing in part, to watch Trump take credit for the first step of many criminal reforms when, one, other folks actually did the work for the bill, and two, he is still on the record disparaging the Central Park 5 is exhausting and disingenuous. Trump lives far from the truth, she wrote. You know, it wasn't all that long ago that most American politicians followed the rule that politics stops at the water's edge. Obviously, we have seen President Trump throw that out, continuing to attack Biden while he's been overseas. The Biden campaign has mostly held their fire on that until the president gets back on American soil today. But again, with Biden appearing here in Houston, Texas later today, at a town hall event where he will undoubtedly, as many town halls as I have covered, I can tell you he will undoubtedly get some kind of question about how do you respond to the president's rhetoric. I expect we'll hear this come up more today. You mentioned the attacks from the left. This is something that I do think we will see other Democratic candidates try to go after Joe Biden on in the future. But President Trump, as Simone Sanders points out in her tweet, is not an especially credible voice on the attack on this issue, and I think the Biden campaign knows that.
Garrett, the one issue, though, is President Trump has great success at controlling the narrative. Just this weekend, the Washington Post was writing about Joe Biden's campaign and claiming it had limited exposure, and they walked through his lack of public events. You said it, he's got his first town hall with teachers tonight in Texas. Are his public appearances, or their frequency, about to change?
I don't think so, Stephanie. Look, this is the opportunity that you have when you are the front runner in a race like this. You look at all the polling, you look at the fundraising numbers. Joe Biden's numbers, his data, they are all good. They can run the campaign that they want, and they can set the tone. Joe Biden's campaign can come to Houston, Texas, come to Harris County, a county that has more people in it than Iowa and New Hampshire combined, and hold an event, hold fundraising, and dictate the tone. They are much more comfortable in that position than letting someone like Beto O'Rourke dictate the tone of 6, 7, 8 events a day. But when you are the front runner, particularly in a field this big, you can drive the bus a little bit. And I think at least until that first debate, this is the pace that we're probably going to continue to see from Joe Biden.
Joe Biden setting the tempo. Vaughn, take me to South Carolina. You're talking to voters there, specifically black voters. It will be a key voting bloc in 2020. What are they telling you?
Yeah, we're in South Carolina here. Kamala Harris is actually going to be holding a town hall with Lawrence O'Donnell later this evening on MSNBC. We're just down the road here in Greenville talking to voters about in 2016, about 60% of the Democratic electorate in the South Carolina primary were African-American voters, 37% of which were African-American women. That conversation that Donald Trump is trying to push is not only trying to weaken Joe Biden here in this primary, but also this is part of the president's general election push to weaken people of color from turning out to vote. A big reason why Democrats were able to take back the House of Representatives in 2016, specifically on the crime bill, which Garrett was talking about. We've been having that conversation with some voters there.
I'm Stephanie Rule. It is 9 a.m. on the East Coast, and we have a lot to get to this morning. stories impacting your life today. Starting with President Trump heading back home after his state visit to Japan. The trip meant to secure his relationship with the U.S. ally, instead cementing his obsession with appeasing North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, contradicting his own national security advisor in the process. And in just a few hours, Big Pharma will get pulled into an Oklahoma courthouse. For the very first time, drug makers will face a judge over their role in the opioid epidemic, and it will all be broadcast live. And breaking overnight, millions across the country are waking up to complete disaster. Tornadoes in Ohio slicing a path of destruction through Dayton, while in Oklahoma, towns have been completely cut off as catastrophic flooding and tornadoes have devastated the state. Let's go first to Gabe Gutierrez, who's driving through the damage in Ohio right now. He joins us by phone. Gabe, residents there are describing the scene as a war zone after these tornadoes ripped through the state. Help us understand the extent of damage.
Hi, Steph. Good morning. Well, yeah, the damage is extensive here in the Dayton area. These tornadoes caused a huge path of destruction through the Midwest overnight, meaning homes, not just here in Dayton, but also Indiana destroyed. But what's incredible here, Steph, is that there have been no reported deaths or serious injuries here in this area. Now, this all started around 9:30, 10 o'clock last night. That's when residents first started to get wind that there's these severe storms starting to blow through. The National Weather Service tweeted Monday night that a large and dangerous tornado had hit near Trotwood, Ohio. That's northwest of Dayton. Several apartment buildings were damaged or destroyed. And just before midnight, not just 40 minutes or so, Steph, after that first tornado blew through here, the Weather Service tweeted that another one was going through the same path, churning up debris. Now, the aftermath of some lanes of I-75 blocked north of Dayton in Brookville, that's Brookville, excuse me, that's just west of the city. The storm tore roofs off schools and destroyed a barn, heavily damaged homes. We are just getting on the interstate right now, and to my right, I just see a gas station that's been ripped apart. There's heavy traffic here, trees down as far as the eye can see. And also, Steph, in Indiana, 75 homes were damaged in the town of Pendleton, also the nearby community of Huntsville. So the damage is extensive from this line of severe storms that blew through here. This is after several weeks of heavy activities really throughout the country. 500 reported tornadoes in the last 30 days. Many of these communities throughout the middle part of the country, Tornado Alley and elsewhere in the south, have been really dealing with all of this. And now that we're seeing first light here near the Dayton area, we can now start to see more of this damage. We have to report on it throughout the day. But again, thankfully, no serious injuries and no deaths to report so far. But search teams are going out and assessing the damage this morning.
500 tornadoes. What a month they've had. And now let's head to Oklahoma, where Kerry Sanders is standing by. Flooding there is getting even worse in some areas. Kerry, how bad is it?
Well, it's rising, and the Arkansas River is still increasing. There's more rain in the forecast. Just remember, there's a relationship here. The tornadoes come and those thunderheads that dump the rain and result in roads getting washed out like this, and we're seeing more of that along the Arkansas River. To give you an idea, upriver in the Keystone Dam, right now they're releasing 275,000 cubic feet of water a second. So it almost sounds unfathomable. So to explain the amount of water that we're talking about, that is 180 Olympic-sized swimming pools every minute of water going through. Now, some areas have been completely cut off. About an hour from here is a small town called Braggs. It's a mountain town, and it was evacuated, but at least 300 people decided to stay behind. Well, the water then cut the town off. Then electricity dropped, and then they had no fresh water. Food was running light, and so the folks on the outside said, let's see if we can cut a path back to the town. They built what they call the Impossible Road, 7 miles in and around the flooded areas, got to the town, and now have delivered water and food to those who decided to stay behind. This problem of the flooding will continue in the coming 24 hours because more rain is in the forecast, and all that rain water is still flowing down the Arkansas River.
More rain in the forecast. Kerry Sanders, stay safe, and thank you. right, Hallie. We got several key headlines coming out of this trip. President Trump joining with Kim Jong-un in attacks against Joe Biden, and the president defending North Korea and that dictator against his own national security advisor. Walk me through the fallout here.
Yeah, a lot going on here, Steph, and let me take those two topics because those really are the two big headlines coming out of this trip, one foreign, one domestic. Remember, this trip overseas to Tokyo was meant to reinforce the president's friendship with Japan's leader, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Keep in mind that the president is now on his way home. He's 30,000 feet over the country right now. He landed in Alaska for a refuel. He'll be landing back in Washington later on this afternoon after speaking with troops at an air base near Tokyo earlier today for Memorial Day. Here's the deal, right? It's meant to reinforce the friendship with Prime Minister Abe, but there was still a notable split between these two leaders on the issue of North Korea. President Trump, when asked directly whether the North's recent missile tests were a violation of UN sanctions, brushed it off. He dismissed it, saying essentially it didn't matter to him. This is not just a split with one of the U.S.'s closest allies in the region, and by the way, a country under threat from those very missiles by North Korea. It's also a rebuke, essentially, of the president's own national security advisor, John Bolton, who just several days ago said, yes, of course, this is a UN Security Council resolution violation, Stephanie. So that is something that we are watching for fallout from. The other piece that we're already seeing fallout from is about the president's eye on domestic politics, even while he's on overseas, because he has been going after Joe Biden, seemingly preoccupied with somebody who could be a potential 2020 rival for him. You've already seen, for example, Democrat Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who's running for the 2020 primary, come out and criticize President Trump for seeming to side with Kim Jong-un against Joe Biden, essentially saying that, yes, the attacks that Kim has leveled against the former vice president are what the president agrees with. It's not just Democrats, though, even Republicans. Adam Kinzinger, for example, have come out saying that's a pretty low blow, essentially. President Trump is not backing down from it, though. He really is leading into this, refusing to back away from that tweet. We're curious to see what the reaction from the former vice president will be today. So far, we've heard from, for example, his campaign advisors essentially saying, hey, Donald Trump lives far from the truth and imploring the media to cover substance, not just President Trump's attacks.
Sounds like Team Biden is not going to take the bait. Thanks so much, Hallie Jackson. Hallie, travel safe. Now let's take you back to the newsroom where Stephanie Goff is here with new details on a restrictive abortion bill expected to be passed in Louisiana today. Steph, what is this?
Well, you know, Steph, this is just the latest bill in a string of bills that we've seen recently. This one in Louisiana, this is a heartbeat bill, so-called. It means that at 6 weeks, roughly, when a fetal heartbeat is detectable, abortions will be banned. And I was in Louisiana last week. I spoke with a lot of these lawmakers. There's very little resistance to this bill, and it passed overwhelmingly in the Senate. So it's almost a foregone conclusion that it's going to pass in the House today when they vote on it. And what you're seeing as well on top of all these bills, and this would just be the latest stage, is the legal action starting to come. We saw a judge in Mississippi rule that there was a preliminary injunction on a similar bill that was passed, a 6-week ban on abortion. That will basically not go into effect. You saw the Missouri governor also sign a 6-week ban in his state. That
Midwest were waking up to devastation. If they were mostly cold, it was a dangerous night. Multiple tornadoes ripping through western Ohio, pulverizing buildings, leveling trees, knocking out power for tens of thousands of homes and businesses. Just look at those pictures.
Next thing I know, windows was breaking. I heard a lot of debris flying around and this stuff crashing and this glass is everywhere.
That's about, I'd say 10 to 15 seconds. Scariest 15 seconds of my life.
All right, well, at least 24 tornadoes hit near Dayton. Another hit in Salina, some 90 miles north of there. At least 36 people have been treated in hospitals for relatively minor injuries. Thank goodness so far no reports of deaths due to these tornadoes. Let's go to our colleague Ryan Young. He joined us in Salina this morning. What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Really a scary situation. When you talk to some of the people who lived through this, they're talking about the pressure they felt in their body, even looking for scenes of destruction. It's very easy to see. Guys, take a look at this. You see the car turned over from the sheer power of the wind that blew through here. But look, when you think about this, you think about the impact it has on people. I'll walk you back this direction because look at how you can see the path. First of all, it took this roof off right here, guys. And then if you look down this across the street here. We were even told that 2 houses over, there was a family trapped in a basement, and they had to have a fire crew come and rescue them after all this debris fell on top of their basement area. There's stories like this, but listen to this woman talk about how terrifying this was overnight.
I came out last night, and I mean, the first thing I thought of was war zone. Because it just looked like somebody just took a bomb.
It's like in the distance, a train coming, and I jumped out of bed, put my shoes on, ran to the hallway. I took your things, banging against the apartment. And it was a little quick. It was quick.
Even shot from above, we shot this video, and you can see just the immense damage from a distance with the drone video. We saw about a half a mile of damage, and we were talking to people from house to house who basically told us they were lucky they got the warning from the weather service and they were able to get in the basement in time. Coming back now live, you can see the power that we talked about before. Look at this tree branch that's actually stuck in this tire. This truck is a polarized mess. But as we talk about the cleanup, people firstly starting to come out and see the damage for themselves, look over there in the distance. You see what everybody's sort of concerned about right now, which is those power line crews who are working as we speak, cutting down large branches and trying to get back in. We've also seen the gas company doing the critical work of shutting off the gas to some of these homes because obviously they're so damaged you wouldn't want that gas spreading anywhere else. We really heard some stories of survival just getting into this puppy and Jim, but you can understand why people are so upset dealing with this sort of damage, especially when it happened in the overnight hours.
Of course, and there's been really no reprieve for the entire midsection of this country. Ryan Young, thank you for racing there to be there for us this morning. We appreciate it.
And the speeds, the wind speeds of this first capable is just incredible. Well, another area, relentless wave storms in the southern plains has sent the Arkansas River into record territory. In some spots, the river couldn't top out more than 4 feet above the previous high. Catastrophic floods are possible this morning. The entire state, that's right, the entire state of Oklahoma remains under a state of emergency. Ed Lavandera is in Sand Springs, just west of Tulsa. So, Ed, as you look there, think, what area is at risk of flooding right now?
Well, if you were sitting along the Arkansas River, kind of
Me should know, man.
helpless feeling at this point, and maybe just essentially just wait out and see what happens here as these floodwaters continue to rise. We're in a neighborhood just west of Tulsa, and Jim, to give you a sense of, we are about a mile away from the bank of the Arkansas River in this particular neighborhood. And this is floodwaters that have been released from the Keystone Dam there. Everything's making its way downstream. And we have spoken to residents here in this area, and they say some of these homes, dozens of homes in this particular neighborhood, they're underwater, taking on water anywhere between 2 and 6 feet, depending on the area where they're lying. As I mentioned, all of this water coming from the Keystone Dam. We have drone footage kind of showing you the flood gates from there. 275,000 cubic feet of water being released from that dam every second. And all of this pushing downstream. So there's concern here in Tulsa. The river's expected to crest the result sometime tomorrow, perhaps going up another foot. But even greater concern downstream from where we are as you leave eastern Oklahoma to get into western Arkansas, the Fort Smith area, where the water there is expected to crest for another day or so, another couple of days, and that water there could go up another 5 to 6 feet. So real concern as neighborhoods along the path of this river and other rivers in the area as well are really threatening hundreds of homes and putting livelihoods here. And the concern, Jim and Poppy, is more rain expected later today and tomorrow. That can come in.
Can you imagine if you're looking at your front doorstep? There's just those families, and we're glad to have you there. We know you're going to keep us up.
Thanks, Ed. Right now, President Trump is heading back to the United States after Prime Minister of Japan and National Security Advisor.
Another person very much on the president's mind, as President Joe Biden, of course, the #1 Democratic contender in 2020. He may have been thousands of miles away from the attacks against the 2020 candidate. Ramping up what's being seen as Boris Sanchez clearly alive in Tokyo with the latest, Boris, these attacks, personal attacks on politicians, they're not new, but to be overseas and to say you share the assessment of a fellow U.S. statesman with that
Jim and Poppy, not just remarkable, it's unprecedented, and really it draws into question just how much President Trump trusts Kim Jong-un. And you're right, there was a lot of pomp and circumstance, a lot of pageantry during the president's visit to Japan, but not a whole lot of substance. We didn't see a breakthrough on a trade deal, which was one of the focal points of this visit. And now you have this exposed rift between President Trump and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. President Trump not believing that North Korea violated UN resolution for the short-range ballistic missile test. Shinzo Abe flatly saying that he believes that they violated these resolutions. And he shows that President Trump is sort of on an island on this, going against some of his own advisors, even outspoken members of Congress, and obviously a key ally like Abe. Further, the president sided with Kim Jong-un on North Korean assessment of Joe Biden being a low IQ individual. The president also, we should point out, took time out of his trip here in North Korea to tweet criticism, or rather here in Japan, I should say, to tweet criticism of Joe Biden, attacking the former vice president and senator for his votes in the 1994 crime bill. It gives you an idea of where the president's mind is right now as we get closer and closer to 2020. We should also point out the president is going to revisit Japan just a few weeks over the G20. Jim and Poppy.
That's right. Boris Sanchez, thanks for being on that trip. We're reporting for us live from Tokyo this morning. Let's talk about the politics back here at home. CNN political commentator Errol Lewis and CNN political reporter Arlette Fine join us now. Arlette, of course, is in Houston, where Biden will return to the campaign trail today for the first time in 10 days. So let me begin with you, Arlette, just on that. I mean, really interesting piece in the Washington Post talking about this. He's statted out as critical, few words from his team. No public event scheduled when every other 2020 contender was out there at Ice Cream Social, shaking hands, kissing babies, etc. Explain the thinking of the Biden team to us. They know him already, so we don't have to, be out there every moment here. And he's been campaigning, I guess, since 1988 when he first ran. Is that the thinking?
Well, that's part of it, Poppy. And Biden's really running this front-runner style campaign. You're seeing fewer public appearances, more high-dollar fundraiser compared to other candidates. But part of the strategy is, yes, that he is a known commodity here in the U.S. Voters know who Joe Biden is, so he doesn't have to spend as much time introducing himself to voters in the way that other Democratic candidates do. But they are aware that he does have to put in that time, pounding the pavement, being out there with voters. But really, over the past month, you've seen him hold 11
Welcome, viewer.
and 9 fundraisers overall.
Please say hello in the chats.
Alone and wasn't out in public
I'm
doing any
fucking
events.
bored and lonely and
That's
depressed.
going to change today. We're going to see him out on the campaign trail for the first time in 10 days. He and his wife Jill Biden, who's a community college professor, they're going to be speaking to teachers here at a town hall with the teachers union, making that
Window unit AC blowing up my back of my neck, keeping me cold while the rest of the house gets warm.
So Biden returning to the trail today after those 10 days off, and we'll see going forward how intense the schedule is heading into that first phase.
Just wondering what the fuck to do with myself, man. I don't feel like doing nothing.
On the 94 crime bill, though, which Biden supported, that more strategic.
I don't really have anything to do.
He's in effect going after African-American voters here.
Maybe take out the trash.
Is there any potential for that kind of argument?
As if he's trying to sort of turn them off from who he thinks and is worried about. Clearly, here's your
Trying to figure out what I'm going to do about my job situation.
Negative campaigning is a sort of a slightly...
Haven't been smoking weed, though. No weed.
He's trying to get people so disgusted that they say, Donald Trump knows very well, and his strategy...
It would be so easy to smoke some weed right now, but I'm resisting. It's been a week. It's been 8 days.
If he wants a repeat of that, he needs to get a similarly sort of muted, discouraged, maybe not quite as enthusiastic black base to the Democratic Party come election day.
Smartest house I've heard.
gets right to the point of what
Yeah.
it's about.
I am interested, though, in how much you think
I really
Anita
miss my
Hill
wife and
the way
kids.
that Joe Biden conducted those hearings.
Namely the kids at this point, but I miss my family, you know. Wish there was something I could do to get them back. But I can't compete with somebody who isn't crippled,
We know that
apparently.
millennials now outnumber baby boomers. We know that younger voters, especially younger voters of
I'm
color,
just a useless
are not
fucking
all that
cripple.
thrilled about what happened with the 94 crime bill. Those of us who lived through it understand that there's some nuance to it.
Mentally and
You
physically
kind of had to
handicapped.
be there to sort of, I think, really recognize what was going on. But the reality is, it was a problem for Hillary Clinton. And to what was going on in the 1990s.
Can you say hello in the chats?
Millennial voters and the younger voters of color are going to be unforgiving about it, then yeah, Joe Biden definitely has a problem. I don't think he has a problem just because Donald Trump has pointed out this obvious fact, but it is a cleavage within the party that's going to have to get resolved.
So Arlen, how do Biden's advisors and his team react to President Trump being abroad?
Well, thanks anyways.
Incredibly sharing a North Korean dictator's assessment of him beyond the schoolyard attacks, just saying, oh yeah, I agree with Kim that he's a low IQ individual. Do they ignore it, or do they think it's an issue they have to respond to?
Reduced to the point of barely surviving. That's basically all I'm doing. Just surviving. Fucking life seems meaningless. Hope is nowhere to be found. My best hope is over a month out, as far as job prospects go. If you can say hello in the chats, I'd like to hear how somebody else is doing. Stop thinking about my fucking problem. Oh, Mr. Conway. Oh, viewer number 2 is Mr. Conway.
Say they are just
Welcome, Mr. Conway. How you doing, sir? Thanks for stopping by. Feeling pretty fucking depressed today. Can't stop regretting everything. My head's not spinning at least because of the fucking medications. Medication has me feeling a little bit better, but safety at work course for working in construction. That's cool. I don't know if you heard the update. I finally met the owner of the place that's hiring a service advisor, but they're not going to be hiring a service advisor until probably June 1st or July. 6 weeks out, basically. I'm really stressed about bills. almost out of milk. Don't have much to eat besides the free shit that I've been taking home from work. The news just seems to be talking about the same fucking 3 stories over and over again. Trump's comments about Kim Jong-un and Joe Biden. Mount Everest death toll rising to 11. Nothing on the European elections, really. I haven't seen anything about that. What's going on there? Anything special? Greens are up a good bit. Is that good? I think the highlight of my day is when I'm going to be taking a shit. Yeah, that makes sense. I think Europe definitely needs some kind of army to protect itself from Russia. But then the European army might wind up helping deteriorate NATO even further. So it's kind of catch-22. And we've had some major tornadoes ripping across Ohio in the Midwest. They're just going back and forth talking about that, and then same shit over and over again. No matter what channel, no matter what broadcast, just the same damn stories over and over again. Welcome, viewer number 2. Feel free to say hello in the chats. I wish I quit smoking weed a couple weeks ago. That way I could just fucking pass the piss test and go to work for Walmart for a while. Right now I got no routine. Just fucking a whole week off of work. Don't know what the hell to do with myself. Waiting to see if I can pay my bills. Oh Oh, yeah?
In terms of the relationship with North Korea. Now, some would say, yes, Kim might be playing the president. I would think.
I don't know nothing about that, brother. All I know is that the American pharmaceutical companies are drugging the hell out of me right now. I got no choice. I need the fucking medications right now.
As part of the defense of the line.
I mean, there are a lot of Americans who live and work in South Korea, as well as soldiers, more than 20,000
Right.
are posted there, and U.S. bases.
Right. So, Rachel, politically speaking, doesn't this boil down to the fact that if the president condemned North Korea and said, yeah,
But I need the medication right now, man. At least my thoughts are just slowly spinning out of control now, you know? You still there? It says 0 people watching. Click the like button, man.
He is concerned about saying that the first president with North Korea dictator, and he really wanted to be successful. And
So you're 0 people, it seems, still. Had 2 people just for a second there. Went back down to 1. Now it says 0.
But the reality is that our allies, and a lot of Americans as well, including here in the U.S. Congress, they think that sort of the remarks
It's good to see you.
that's only going to encourage North Korea to keep doing these sort of tests that they're doing. And how far are they willing to go before Trump says this is enough? These talks are over.
I'm worried about paying bills, but I'm not quite freaked out yet because medication just has me kind of zombified. You moved out just before you lost the job, so everything's up in the air. Oh, Jesus, man, that sucks. I'm sorry. That's
Dyson's latest V11 quart feed vacuum intelligently senses and adjusts suction and runtime based on floor type, and the new digital display.
I would have told you save your money and don't move out. I wish I had some family I could live with right now.
Japan, carrying the 2020 campaign overseas in violation of
Being out on
diplomatic
your own
protocol.
alone kind of
The
sucks.
president siding with North Korea dictator Kim Jong-un over the former vice president and trying to exploit Democratic Party differences over Biden's support for a 1994 crime bill that passed overwhelmingly back then, but in retrospect is now controversial.
Joining me now, NBC White House correspondent Kristen Welker, MSNBC's Garrett Haig in Houston, ahead of a Biden town hall with teachers this afternoon. Former New York Democratic Congressman Joe Crowley and Bill Kristol, editor-at-large at The Bulwark, here at the table with me. Kristen, first to you in Tokyo. The president has taken off. He's, in fact, heading back here. We'll be back at Andrews Air Force, Joint Base Andrews, sometime this afternoon. But he's left a path of diplomatic destruction, if you will, by bringing the campaign front
Talking
and
about
center onto the world
Biden's
stage.
role in the
Kristen,
1994
I've never seen
crime
anything quite like
bill.
this.
No, we haven't, Andrea.
Trump's talking
and,
about it. Oh,
you
so
know, typically,
Trump made a tweet about it, so
traditionally,
apparently everybody's going to talk
politics
about
stops
it.
at the water's
That makes
edge.
perfect sense.
Presidents do not take aim at their political rivals on the world stage, and yet President Trump did break with norms in doing that, took direct aim at Joe Biden, but also sided with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and his criticism for Joe Biden, saying that he does agree that he has a low IQ individual. He was even pressed, Andrea, on the fact that, look, this is a murderous dictator that you're siding with. President Trump brushed that aside and said bottom line is he thinks Joe Biden's been a disaster for the country, citing his days as the former vice president, of course. But then he took to Twitter hours after that, Andrea, and took aim at the former vice president for the 1994 crime bill. Of course, this is something that Biden has spent a lot of time talking about already on the campaign trail. He said parts of it were not the right path, did lead to mass incarceration, particularly for minorities, but he also defended parts of the bill. The fact that it did prevent some weapons getting into the hands
I'm just
of
so
would-be
fucking
criminals.
depressed,
The
man.
fact that it also included the Violence Against Women Act. Now, interestingly, President Trump trying to make the case that Biden's not going to get a whole lot of support among African Americans because of that. Well, take a look at a recent poll, Andrea. According to a recent Quinnipiac poll, Biden's favorability among African American voters stands at 71%. For President Trump, it's at 8%. We know it's a constituency that candidate Trump struggled with out on the 2016 campaign trail. He knows that it could be critical to his re-election, and so that is why you're seeing him take this.
Even with the
course. But
antidepressants, I'm
this
still fucking
remarkable
depressed.
Sort of unprecedented move by bringing 2020
kinda more
politics
numb.
into his visit here in
I don't
Tokyo.
know. I don't know how to describe
And
it.
Garrett Haig, you're in Texas. In Houston, Texas, Biden is going to have a rally there today. First of all, we haven't seen very much of him. He was not among the many Democrats campaigning on Memorial Day. And there's been some note taken of the fact that Biden has not been out there, 10 days off the campaign trail. But he has not responded, and they've said to some of our people here at NBC that he's not going to respond while the president was still overseas. So he's not going to engage. Presumably that means he might engage later today.
Yeah, I think it'd be unlikely that Biden would not have something to say about this or would not get asked about it at his town hall event here in Houston tonight. But as Donald Trump is busting through all these norms, the Biden campaign is largely holding to the idea that they don't want to get into a back and forth. They don't want to get into a fight with the president of the United States when he's overseas. The only official response of any kind from the Biden campaign to the president on the crime bill, at least, was a tweet from Simone Sanders, who's a senior advisor to the Biden campaign, which essentially boils down to the argument that Donald Trump doesn't have any credibility on this issue, in part because of his calls for the death penalty for the Central Park Five, who are, of course, later exonerated. This is just not an issue that Donald Trump really has a leg to stand on. The second part of Sanders' tweet is also interesting, though, because she chastises the media a little
Anyways,
bit for
man, I
letting
appreciate
Donald
you coming
Trump
to hang out
be
with me,
our
bro.
managing editor here and essentially inject what is now almost a 20-year-old piece of
So fucking
legislation
hard being
right
alone,
back
man.
into the front of the Democratic campaign. And yet, again, here we are talking about the crime bill. And I hear this from campaigns, from all the Democratic campaigns, when the president does this, the idea that
I'm looking forward to having a roommate, but kind of stressed out about the fact that she has 2 small dogs and hoping my landlord doesn't get pissed about it.
Joe Biden were on the campaign trail more, he might be able to dictate more of that coverage himself. But there you have it. That's a front runner's prerogative at this stage, where he can let his finance schedule, he can let the schedule that they want to set and the tempo that they want to set drive the rest of the race.
Miguel Bruges, welcome.
As it was not that long ago, 2 months ago, whether someone like Beto O'Rourke was going to drive
Developing Roblox games.
No. Now you have Joe Biden sitting fairly comfortably in that pole position, setting a pace that he wants to keep. And when you've got a 20-point lead over your next closest competitor, you can do that.
Well, and in fact, according to the Brennan Center,
All right, will do.
bill, first of all, was very Bill Clinton was trying to pick up support.
Although I ought to just save it for paying my bills.
More conservative Democrats, as well as some Republicans, for
Because man, the bills are coming due. Let me tell you, the bills are coming due.
that was widely supported in urban communities. Joe Crowley,
I'll be right back. I got to use the
from a
restroom.
New Yorker standpoint, people are heralding the assault weapon ban.
Thanks, Miguel. Good to see you. Thanks for stopping by and hanging out and chatting with me.
Mass killings out in California.
Never seen you before, I don't think.
And so there was a lot to like about that crime bill, as well as now the incarceration rate went
Yeah, I could take the opportunity to put some gas in my car, I
The
suppose.
sentencing provisions were too harsh among many people. It came up in 1996, and Hillary Clinton got herself in a jam.
Or maybe I'll go to the bar
About
tonight.
super predators, about those teenage gangs.
It certainly was in vogue.
Get a woodchuck.
During the time I was in the state legislature, I remember well.
Not a
state
woodchuck.
legislatures all over
It's
the
Angry
country
Orchard
were
apple
passing
cider
three
beer.
strikes and you're in
Angry Orchard.
legislation.
Never heard of
three
that until
felonies
recently.
And you're in for life. And so it wasn't just here in Washington, it was all over the country that was happening. But I do think it's important to note here that, there were...
I'll be right back. Hold on,
aspects
y'all.
that were
I'm just
positive as well, as you
gonna use the
mentioned,
restroom right quick.
police officers. But it's also important to note that Donald Trump fueled the fire of those flames of the fire by taking out a full-page ad in every New York City newspaper going after the Central Park Five and calling for the reinstatement of the death penalty. So he's talking about the pot calling the kettle here.
And Rudy Giuliani, in fact, Bill Kristol, was in favor of the crime bill and tweeted in favor of it on May 15th of this year. So that's last week, I think.
But I want to come back to Trump's favor of fraud, which is on the crime bill. Democrats in the House voted for it 3-1. Republicans were mostly against it. In the Senate, even more overwhelmingly. It was a Democrat. John Lewis was an original co-sponsor. The Congressional Black Caucus, I believe, endorsed the bill, though.
They were divided.
They were divided on the bill, but I think they officially worked with Bill Clinton on it. There's a lot of, the reason Republicans were against it is there was a lot of money for social welfare. Remember midnight basketball? The conservatives made fun of the money that went to sponsor various activities for young people at risk. So I mean, whatever its merits or demerits, it's a little ridiculous to pretend that Joe Biden was out of the mainstream. Bernie Sanders actually voted for it. Just on President Trump over in Japan. I mean, seeing a president of the United States with the American flag behind him and the flag of the host country, in this case Japan, which we saw in that clip there, saying something, attacking the most recent vice president of the United States on the most vulgar kind of political grounds, not on some, not criticizing him respectfully or differing with him on some foreign policy issue, is really astonishing. I mean, and you can say, well, I guess I'm just old-fashioned. These are the old-fashioned norms, but it does damage to the country, I think, and to our ability to conduct a serious foreign policy in ways that we'll pay a price for some time, I'm afraid.
But only Adam Kinzinger and then Peter King more recently were tweeting and speaking out against the president on this. We didn't hear from a single Republican senator that I could find speaking out against, here when we've had norms in foreign policy, especially from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, from Joe Biden, as well as, of course, Dick Lugar, his partner on many of these things. There was never this kind of partisanship on foreign turf.
Can I tell one story, and then I want to hear from Joe? But so I was Dan Quayle's chief of staff in 1990. We led a bipartisan delegation to the funeral of Duarte in El Salvador, and it was a big, broad delegation. It was Jeane Kirkpatrick, Reagan's UN ambassador on the right. Ted Kennedy was there, who had been very opposed to Reagan's Central American policy. And I was a little nervous. I was kind of young. I was the chief of staff. I said, "Here's the plan. Here's the schedule." And
especially because of the deaths in El Salvador.
Yes,
and the nuns.
Right. No, it was a very controversial area, and it was still in some doubt. And I think Duarte was an admirable man, but not everyone else agreed to that anyway. So we were going to represent the U.S. at the funeral. And I remember this vividly. Ted Kennedy, whom I obviously didn't know very well, and was kind of in awe. Sort of at one point, I was doing a little briefing for everyone, and he said, "Can I interrupt for a second, Bill?" And I said, "Yes, certainly, Senator Kennedy." And he said, "Look, I just want to remind all my colleagues here that we are representing the United States here, and we have a lot of differences back home, but let's just leave them behind, and let's just speak in unity about the U.S. and our ability, willingness to work together to help Central America move forward." And I know you don't need this reminder, he said to everyone looking around at his colleagues, but I want to offer you that. I still stick so much in my mind that Ted Kennedy said that aboard Air Force Two with Dan Quayle as the vice president.
That's such a wonderful story, Bill. I mean, bringing that to light, Joe.
A lot of times it was people criticizing the president overseas as well. And I remember 3 of my colleagues, when they went to Iraq just before the invasion, and criticized our entry into that war. The excoriation and the tumult and extermination that they went through after that, was really unprecedented, I think. But at the same time, it is the President of the United States. This is our President making statements about a potential candidate or a candidate against them. It's probably without precedent. It's probably without precedent.
And Kristen, before we let you go, and we want you to fly home because we miss you, but Kristen, the other thing was insulting his hosts. Now, I know that Shinzo Abe would be the last of our allies to criticize or respond because they are so diplomatic, so polite. But by emphasizing that he didn't care about short-range missiles, even though they're UN violations, and emphasizing that short-range missiles are not a problem, we only worry about the big missiles that can reach, Hawaii or California. Well, how about the fact that these are what are so threatening to Japan, to South Korea? The implication here is that he might cut a deal with Kim Jong-un and cut out our closest allies in the region. And so there's a lot of damage left behind.
Andrea, you're absolutely right. It was remarkable. I am going to be getting on a plane heading home soon, Andrea. Right. So thanks you guys too. But look, it was remarkable.
All right, so there went the highlight of my day. I took a shit.
President Trump here, and during that joint press conference, he was pressed on how those recent missile tests by North Korea. President Trump said it doesn't bother him. Well, guess what? It does bother Prime Minister Abe. This is the chief national security concern here because Japan is
Acadian Mariculture at iCloud.com.
So Prime Minister Abe was very clear during that press conference that he does see those
Acadian,
ACADIAN,
MARICULTURE at iCloud.com.
The president wants to get a trade deal. That didn't happen. Of course, there are elections that are going to happen here in July, so they're looking past that date. President Trump will be back here, though, in just a few weeks for the G20 summit, where trade in North Korea will be front and center once again, Andrea.
Kristen Welker, thank you so much. And Garrett Haig in Houston, Joe Crowley, Bill Best.
I think I need a lot of things more than I need to go fucking
major opioid
get coffee, but
starts today.
I'll at least go to the bar or something sometime this week, I guess.
Johnson & Johnson is partly responsible for sparking the deadly epidemic.
I need flea shampoo for Dingo.
There's a very simple truth with opioids. If you oversupply, people will die. The reason we have an opioid crisis is that simple.
MSNBC legal analyst Danny Savalas joins me now to sort this all out. The opioid industry, really, this is the first big drug company being put on trial. It's a civil case for their responsibility for the abuse. And how do they make the link in civil law between something which is FDA approved and legal, but is abused by people? And is it their responsibility to not have the advertisements that push this without proper warnings? Is that the tort case?
You've stated a lot of it right there. The issue here is going to be causation, legal causation. The plaintiff should try to prove that the drug manufacturers caused, through their marketing, a doctor to write a prescription. Now remember, doctors have independent medical judgment, and then that prescription caused the patient to become addicted, and then that independent choice, not choice, but that independent addiction became the fault of the drug manufacturer. The bottom line is this is a challenging causation case because there are so many intervening factors along the way, compounded by the fact that this is not like tobacco litigation. Opiates have a benefit. They have a health benefit. It may be outweighed in the future by the risk of abuse, but the question here is, did the marketing campaign by the drug manufacturer result in these doctors writing these scripts, which
looking at my kitchen trying to figure out what the hell I want to eat.
It's a novel application of a public nuisance theory of liability, and while the pharmaceutical companies should be very, very concerned, at the same time,
tuna salad sandwich or a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Do they have to establish that the drug companies misled
I don't feel like either one of those.
Encourage doctors through
probably
any
go with
kind of
tuna salad.
payoffs or subsidies? I mean, do they have to make that link between the overprescribing and the drug companies?
They have to make the link between the causation link.
It certainly is a lot easier to
The issue
eat
here is that the
when you
pharmaceutical
smoke pot.
companies were engaging in First Amendment protected activity by
I can hardly believe it's been 8 days since I have.
and advertising things that were FDA approved.
$20, thank you, sir.
Ultimately, that gave information only to doctors who then independently wrote prescriptions. So there is a legal challenge here. You know, it's interesting, that opening statement that, you know, we're reducing all of our trials to like a Johnny Cochran type, if you oversupply, people will die. But here this case is about marketing. It's not necessarily about supply, and we need to hold defendants to a higher standard of causation.
Danny Sabella, that's so clear. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you clearing that up. And coming up, abortion showdowns over Roe v. Wade off the docket for now because they basically sidestepped it. The justices affirmed a lower court's ruling that invalidated one part of the law that prohibited abortions in cases of severe...
I got a roommate, supposedly, coming down from Minnesota. She's been in here in the comments. I don't know if you saw the girl named Karma.
Comes as several Republican-led state legislatures now move to pass sweeping new laws restricting abortions, 8 states and all so far. So let's get
Been talking to her a whole lot.
from NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams at the Supreme Court.
We've been staying on the phone for like an hour at a time, man.
The Daily Beast and MSNBC contributor, and Kimberly Atkins, senior
I kinda like her.
news correspondent for WBUR and MSNBC contributor as well. Pete, first of all, what did the court do? Am I correct that
It's just kind of
2 of the justices
overwhelming because I'm not ready for a relationship, and I am worried about her 2 dogs.
They shouldn't have even taken it up. So 7-2 shouldn't have even taken up the fetal remains burial issue.
But at least 2 dogs is better than somebody having 2 kids, right?
That appears to be the vote, Andrea. This is what's known as a per curiam, or unsigned opinion, unsigned order of the court. So the only noted dissents were from Sonia Sotomayor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So we assume it's a 7-2 vote, although the difference is Justice Sotomayor really didn't get into the merits at all, and Justice Ginsburg did. So what the Supreme Court, the majority opinion, the per curiam opinion,
And
says
she's got
here
work
is
history and stuff, so she's not going to be
that,
mooching
number
off of me.
one, the state has a legitimate interest in
And she says she's going to come help me clean up
how
everything.
it cited an earlier ruling
I think
on
she
that.
likes me.
And it said that provision of the law that the
I'm
court
just
allowed
not
to go
ready for a
into effect
relationship.
was rationally tied to that, even though it may not have been
I feel
a
so
perfect fit.
emotionally
Now,
unavailable.
as for the other question,
I miss my
though,
wife.
on the characteristics of the fetus law, that was the lower court ruling putting that on hold remains in place. The court basically said, we're not expressing
Karma.
any view at all on the merits
Like,
of
as
that
in,
question,
karma's a bitch.
on who should win or who should lose, or whether it's constitutional or
She's
not.
not a bitch,
We
apparently.
just don't like to take up issues
Doesn't seem like
this
one to
when
me
there's only
anyways.
one ruling from the lower courts. Typically,
you know.
the Supreme Court's most often cited reason for taking
Too early to
cases
tell.
there,
Women
there's
can
a split
surprise you.
among the circuits, and they like to let the lower courts chew on these issues first before it gets up here. So for that reason alone, the court said, we're not going to take that up. We're going to leave the lower court ruling on that in place. So it's trying to, I guess what you could say, the upshot here is the Supreme Court is signaling its willingness to uphold abortion restrictions.
It would be very interesting to go from someone who was an imposter who I thought
Is
was
a restriction on abortion, but no big appetite
the embodiment
to
or
take up
incarnation
the
of
big question
karma
on Roe v. Wade right now.
to a girl that's named Karma.
Pete and Kim and Sam, as the Louisiana House is set to debate a bill
But
that
she's
would
35,
restrict abortion.
never had
Fetal
kids.
heartbeat is detected as early as 6 weeks into pregnancy, when many people don't even know. Many women don't even
Seems
know
really
they're
down to
pregnant.
earth.
The bill overwhelmingly passed the Senate there.
She
and
knows
the
about
Democratic governor said
the
this
channel
was
stuff
fine.
and everything.
And you have in Missouri.
Didn't freaked out about it.
Planned Parenthood is
So what more could I ask for, right?
the only clinic that they have.
Yeah, no.
But I'm going to
Clear your throat. I'll take it from here. Basically, in Missouri, you have what is, in essence, a de facto ban on abortion because if there is no access...
I'm just kind of worried about her 2 dogs because they're chihuahuas.
Where can women...
And chihuahuas
So
bark
what
when
you
somebody
have
comes
is
to
a
the door,
sweeping
man.
set of laws happening across the South, some of which the constitutionality will be debated and eventually end up...
I'm worried about my landlord
And then
bitching.
you have the practical application of the procedure of abortion, which is being curtailed simultaneously. So it's a 1-2 punch to abortion rights advocates that they do have to cope with.
Yeah, and the court is stepping
carefully, as Pete pointed out, on this and not jumping into the main issue of abortion, but
still adjusting to these medications,
that this
man.
court is willing to uphold restrictions.
Got me dragging ass.
It's a big signal moving forward. I think this court has been wary to strike down major precedent, and I don't think that they're excited about the prospect of going to Roe v. Wade. But it's still giving it, it's still moving faster.
Dingo.
The more of these
What are you
laws
doing?
pass, the more challenges there are. It's going to come to the court faster.
I have a question for Pete, if I can. Pete, does the ruling today signal in any way a timeline for the court to actually entertain some of these other questions?
He's fucking covered in fleas, man. I got no flea shampoo. I need to give him another dish liquid bath.
Just recently passed?
But that fucking dish liquid doesn't keep him off of him.
Case already pending up here.
They just jump right back on his ass.
Texas, this Louisiana law would say that a doctor performing abortions has to have admitting privileges in a
I've never seen a dog attract fleas the way he
The
does.
court hasn't yet said whether it's going to take that case or not, and
It's like not only is he allergic to fleas, but they really, really like him.
That much more modest provision in Louisiana is still waiting for a decision here. One other thing I should note here is the Supreme Court said that on this other provision about the characteristics, that it was never attacked by opponents as an undue burden on a woman's right to choose. And so the court seemed to be saying, you know, we're not getting into that fundamental question about Roe.
Baonite clay.
Undue burden test is
Oh, I don't
really
know where to
the
get
key
that.
to whether Roe v. Wade's going to stand or not. Some of these really harsh decisions, or really harsh restrictions in the states, whether they're going to be constitutional or not. But the Supreme Court said today, we're not touching that third rail.
Pete Williams, thanks so much. I know you were going to be on watch for all of this, but they are.
Wish he'd quit I wish he'd quit pissing in my living
They're
room.
going to take a while to move up to the high court. Just want to bring Sam and Kimberly into something that's just now breaking. That Justin Amash is going after Bill Barr and the way, according to his tweets, this Republican congressman who has already set himself aside from his colleagues on the issue of the Mueller report, saying after receiving the Mueller report, Barr wrote and released a letter on March 24th describing Barr's own decision not to indict the president for obstruction of justice. That letter selectively quotes and summarizes points in Mueller's report in misleading ways. And he's going on in a
I
series
think I'm gonna have some
going
chips.
after the Attorney General William Barr.
I got chips going stale
a
in
new
there.
front,
Bag that's open, you
saying
know.
that he deliberately misrepresented key aspects of the Mueller report.
Well, to me, it's remarkable in two ways. One is that
I doubt it'll fill me
a
up.
Republican who's willing to do this. But the second thing is, objectively, and we can all observe it, Bill Barr did misrepresent
Garden
the findings
centers,
of the
huh?
Mueller report. You look at what was in the Mueller report, and you look at Bill Barr's summarization of it, and it's very evident that he misrepresented. We know that people on Mueller's team.
Well, the only garden centers I got is Home Depot and
worried
Walmart.
about the representation
I guess
that
I
he
gotta check
gave.
them out.
So while Justin Amash speaking up about this is remarkable to see a Republican do that, it's also sort of remarkable that no one else in his party is willing to actually just acknowledge the reality in front of us.
And the person who can really clear this up is Robert Mueller, right? So this puts even increased pressure for him to testify publicly, at least in part, on this issue, exactly what he said, exactly what he meant in this
There you
in the
go.
report.
Can you take a bath?
Not what Bill Barr classified.
Kimberly and Sam, thanks so much. Thanks for getting me through my little coffee.
He don't like taking baths.
And coming up, trading secrets.
I think you would like taking a bath.
between Top and Japan.
You want to take a bath?
Carrying the 2020 campaign overseas in
Go get in the tub?
violation of diplomatic protocol. The president siding with North Korea dictator Kim Jong-un over the former vice president and trying to exploit Democratic Party differences over Biden's support for a 1994 crime bill that passed over.
If he would want to take a bath, I'd give him a bath. He just fucking resists so much. Hurts my back to bathe him,
NBC
man.
White House correspondent Kristen Welker.
Because he doesn't like to stay in the right spot, so I gotta like fucking lean his ass over the whole time I'm bathing him.
This afternoon, former New York Democratic Congressman Joe Crowley and Bill Kristol, editor-at-large at The Bulwark, here at the table with me. Kristen, first to you in Tokyo. The president has taken off. He's in fact heading back here. We'll be back at Andrews Air Force, Joint Base Andrews, sometime this afternoon. But he's left a path of diplomatic destruction, if you will, by bringing the campaign front and center onto the world stage. Kristen, you and I have never seen anything quite like this.
No, we haven't, Andrea, and as you know, typically, traditionally, politics stops at the water's edge. Presidents do not take aim at their political rivals on the world stage, and yet President Trump did break with norms in doing that, took direct aim at Joe Biden, but also sided with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and his criticism for Joe Biden, saying that he does agree that he has a low IQ individual. He was even pressed, Andrea, on the fact that, look, this is a murderous dictator that you're siding with. President Trump brushed that aside and said bottom line is he thinks Joe Biden's been a disaster for the country, citing his days as the former vice president, of course. But then he took to Twitter hours after that, Andrea, and took aim at the former vice president for the 1994 crime bill. Of course, this is something that Biden has spent a lot of time talking about already on the campaign trail. He said parts of it were not the right path, did lead to mass incarceration, particularly for minorities, but he also defended parts of the bill. The fact that it did prevent some weapons.
I think that shop, when it does open, see, they're not open yet to the public. I think when it does open, I think they actually might hire me, though. The guys seem to really like me.
Biden's not going to get a whole lot of support among African Americans because of that. Well, take a look at a recent poll, Andrea. According to a recent Quinnipiac poll, Biden's favorability among African American voters stands at 71%. For President Trump, it's at 8%. We know it's a constituency that candidate Trump struggled with out on the 2016 campaign trail. He knows that it
I told him about my woman situation. Told him my wife left me for another man.
Take this course, but again, this remarkable and sort of
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it, man.
By bringing 2020 politics into his visit here in Tokyo, Andrea.
And Garrett Haake, you're in Texas, in Houston, Texas. Biden is going to have a rally there today. First of all, we haven't seen very much of him. He was not among the many Democrats campaigning on Memorial Day. And there's been some note taken of the fact that Biden has not been out there 10 days off the campaign trail. But he has not responded, and they've said to some of our people here at NBC that he's not going to respond while the president was still overseas. So he's not going to engage. Presumably that means he might engage later today.
Yeah, I think it'd be unlikely that Biden would not have something to say about this or would not get asked about it at his town hall event here in Houston tonight. But as Donald Trump is busting through all these norms, the Biden campaign is largely holding to the idea that they don't want to get into a back and forth. They don't want to get into a fight with the president of the United States when he's overseas. The only official response of any kind from the Biden campaign to the president on the crime bill, at least, was a tweet from Simone Sanders, who's a senior advisor to the Biden campaign, which essentially boils down to the argument that Donald Trump doesn't have any credibility on this issue, in part because of his calls for the death penalty for the Central Park Five, who are, of course, later exonerated. This is just not an issue that Donald Trump really has a leg to stand on. The second part of Sanders' tweet is also interesting, though, because she chastises the media a little bit for letting Donald Trump be our managing editor here and essentially inject what is now almost a 20-year-old piece of legislation right back into the front of the Democratic campaign. And yet, we are talking about the crime bill, and I hear this from campaigns.
If people ignored Trump enough, do you think he'd lose his mind? Yeah. He would probably throw a hissy fit like a fucking 3-year-old.
The flip side of that is the answer to your first question. If Joe Biden were on the campaign trail, he might be able to dictate more of that coverage himself. But there you have it. That's a front runner's prerogative at this stage, where he can let his finance schedule, he can let the schedule that they want to set, and then tempo that they want to set, drive the rest of the race. We aren't talking about, you know, as it was not that long ago, 2 months ago, whether someone like Beto O'Rourke was going to drive the schedule by doing 5 or 6 events a day. No. Now you have Joe Biden sitting fairly comfortably in that pole position, setting a pace that he wants to keep. And when you've got a 20-point lead over your next closest competitor, you can do that.
Well, and in fact, according to the Brennan Center, that crime bill, first of all, was very popular. I covered it at the time. Clearly, Bill Clinton was trying to pick up.
Should I make myself some tuna salad? I'm
from
gonna
the
make tuna
center
salad.
and from more conservative Democrats as well as some Republicans.
Make some fucking tuna salad.
But the fact is, 100,000 more police. That was widely supported in urban communities. Joe Crowley, you can talk to that from a New Yorker standpoint. People are heralding the assault weapon ban with the Dianne Feinstein
Give me like 2 minutes.
senator pushed through after some horrendous mass killings out in California in her state. And so there was a lot to like about that crime bill, as well as now the incarceration rate went way up, and now, retrospectively, the sentencing provisions were too harsh among many people. It came up in 1996, and Hillary Clinton got herself in a jam, speaking about the super predators, about those teenage gangs.
it certainly was in vogue during the time. I was in the state legislature. I remember well. State legislatures all over the country were passing 3 strikes and you're in legislation, 3 felonies and you're in for life. And so it wasn't just here in Washington. It was all over the country that was happening. But I do think it's important to note here that there were other aspects of the bill that were positive, as well as you mentioned, police officers. But it's also important to note that Donald Trump fueled the fire of those flames of the fire by taking out a full-page ad in every New York City newspaper going after the Central Park 5 and calling for the reinstatement of the death penalty. So he's talking about the pot calling the kettle here.
And Rudy Giuliani, in fact, Bill Kristol, was in favor of the crime bill and tweeted in favor of it on May 15th of this year. So that's last week, I think.
But I want to come back to Trump's favor of fraud, but just on the crime bill. Democrats in the House voted for 3-1. Republicans were mostly against it. In the Senate, even more overwhelmingly. It was a Democrat. John Lewis was an original co-sponsor. The Congressional Black Caucus, I believe, endorsed the bill. Though.
They were divided.
They were divided on the bill, but I think they officially worked with Bill Clinton on it. There's a lot of, the reason Republicans were against it is there was a lot of money for social welfare. Remember midnight basketball? The conservatives made fun of the money that went to sponsor various activities for young people at risk. So I mean, whatever its merits or demerits, it's a little ridiculous to pretend that Joe Biden was out of the mainstream. Bernie Sanders actually voted for it. Just on President Trump over in Japan. I mean, seeing a president of the United States with the American flag behind him and the flag of the host country, in this case Japan, which we saw in that clip there, saying something, attacking the most recent vice president of the United States on the most vulgar kind of political grounds, not on some, not criticizing him respectfully or differing with him on some foreign policy issue, is really astonishing. I mean, and you can say, well, I guess I'm still old-fashioned. These are the old-fashioned norms, but it does damage to the country, I think, and to our ability to conduct a serious foreign policy in ways that we'll pay a price for some time, I'm afraid.
But only Adam Kinzinger and then Peter King more recently were tweeting and speaking out against the president on this. We didn't hear from a single Republican senator that I could find speaking out against, here when we've had norms in foreign policy, especially from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, from Joe Biden, as well as, of course, Dick Lugar, his partner on many of these things. There was never this kind of partisanship on foreign turf.
Can I just have one story, and then I want to hear from Joe? So I was Dan Quayle's chief of staff. In 1990, we led a bipartisan delegation to the funeral of Duarte in El Salvador. And it was a big, broad delegation. It was Jeane Kirkpatrick, Reagan's UN ambassador on the right. Ted Kennedy was there, who had been very opposed to Reagan's Central America policy. And I was a little nervous. I was kind of young. I was the chief of staff. I said, here's the plan, here's the schedule. And
especially because of the deaths in El Salvador.
Yes, and it was, right. No, it was a very controversial area. And it was still in some doubt. And I think Duarte was that man, but I didn't want to agree to that anyway. So we were going to represent the U.S. at the funeral. And I remember this vividly. Ted Kennedy, who I obviously didn't know very well, and was kind of in awe. Sort of at one point I was doing a little briefing for everyone, and he said, can I interrupt for a second, Bill? And I said, yes, certainly, Senator Kennedy. And he said, look, I just want to remind all my colleagues here that we are representing the United States here. And we have a lot of differences back home, but let's just leave them behind. And let's just speak in unity about the U.S. and our ability to work together to help Central America move forward. And I know you don't need this reminder, he said to everyone looking around at his colleagues, but I want to offer you that. I still stick so much in my mind that Ted Kennedy said that aboard Air Force Two with Dan Quayle as the vice president.
That's such a wonderful story, Bill. I mean, bringing that to light.
Take one of my detox pills.
It was people criticizing the president overseas as well. And I remember 3 of my
I'm not using them as directed, because as directed, they'll give me some serious fucking... Prem Lama. Hello, Prem Lama. Thanks for saying hello in the chat.
And the tumult and excoriation that they went through after that, was really unprecedented, I think. But at the same time, it is the president of the United States. This is our president making statements about potential.
I'm having a tuna salad sandwich.
It's probably without precedent.
And Kristen,
become my fucking staple food around
I want
here.
you to fly home because we miss you. But Kristen, the other thing was insulting his hosts. Now, I know that Shinzo Abe would be the last of our allies to criticize or respond because they are so diplomatic, so polite. But by emphasizing that he didn't care about short-range missiles, even though they're UN violations, and emphasizing that short-range missiles are not a problem, we only worry about the big missiles that can reach Hawaii or California. Well, how about the fact that these are what are so threatening to Japan, to South Korea? The implication here is that he might cut a deal with Kim Jong-un and cut out our closest allies in the region. And so there's a lot of damage left behind.
Andrea, you're absolutely right. It was remarkable. I am going to be getting on a plane heading home soon, Andrea.
Good.
So miss you guys too. But look, it was remarkable. They rolled out the red carpet for President Trump here, and during that joint press conference, he was pressed on how he viewed those recent missile tests by North Korea. President Trump said it doesn't bother him. Well, guess what? It does bother Prime Minister Abe. This is the chief national security concern here because, of course, Japan is in range of North Korea's rockets. So Prime Minister Abe was very clear during that press conference that he does see those missile tests as a violation of UN security resolutions, Andrea. Not a whole lot of deliverables from this trip. Worth noting, the president wants to get a trade deal. That didn't happen. Of course, there are elections that are going to happen here in July, so they're looking past that date. President Trump will be back here, though, in just a few weeks for the G20 summit, where trade in North Korea will be front and center once again, Andrea.
Kristen Welker, thank you so much. And Garrett Haake in Houston, Joe Crowley, Bill Best in an Oklahoma courtroom where the first major opioid trial starts today. The state attorneys are joining with outside firms to argue that Johnson & Johnson is partly responsible for
I fall for that upload. Yeah, peace, what a lovely concept. But the whole world is gearing towards war right now, whether we like it or not, whether we're prepared for it or not. Apparently they're litigating whether or not Johnson & Johnson has any responsibility in the opiate crisis because of the Oxycontin. And there goes viewer number 2. Well, thanks, Prem Lama, whoever you are, for saying hello. Are you back? It was buffering on my end. Sorry about that. I'm really starting to wish they would fucking take Misha. Because Misha's just been messing stuff up every day. She doesn't have her friend to play with. So she's just been up on the kitchen counter knocking shit over. Up on knocking my laundry over off the backs of the chairs in the kitchen. So I got like my clothes that I've only worn once hanging over the backs of the chairs, you know? Oh, look at me. I'm going to have a real meal. Sandwiches and a chips. Sandwiches and a chips. No. A sandwich or two and some chips. Yeah. Words. Barbecue Lay's. Not the best things in the world, but edible. Definitely starting to get stale.
This is the hardest hit in terms of outages. Help us understand the situation.
Steph and Allie, well, we've been here for the past several hours, taking all this devastation in, and we just got to, within the past few minutes, we just got to this apartment complex, which the roof was completely ripped off. You see the power of this tornado just splinter these trees, and we have talked to several of the residents here that just described the horrifying scene late last night when one of these
Message retracted. What's up with that?
One of the twisters that roared through Ohio was an EF3 with winds of up to 140 miles an hour. And we can see here the damage. Just look at this. The insulation just ripped off of here. It was just horrifying. Some of the residents were telling us what they went through last night. Lisa Hassler, right? I spoke with you just a few moments ago. You were telling me you actually rode out the storm inside this apartment. What did it feel like?
When they tell you it sounds like a freight train, it is. We knew.
I heard that freight train the other day.
The tornado was on top of us. We knew it was going straight over us.
Where'd you write it out?
We were in the bathroom. We had pillows. We had the dog in with us, and just saying our prayers to Jehovah that we make it, and we all did.
You just huddled there with your husband. You were going to make out okay. When you got out, you looked around at this devastation.
We didn't see this at first.
You didn't. It was dark.
No. What I did is when we came into the living room, and I looked out and I saw all the trees gone.
Yeah.
All the trees.
And we've been seeing this as we've been driving here. The trees just ripped apart. Power lines down. So many feet of power.
This was all.
Now you get to see what an ancient reincarnate being with a heart, with a broken heart looks like.
This side, there was an island. There was the other side of the river. Now they're all gone.
And we've been seeing tornadoes for the last several days here in the Midwest and the South and other parts of the country. Did you expect this type of powerful storm to go through here?
As a matter of fact, I called my parents.
This is like mouth
near
torture.
South Vienna, and tried to warn them it was coming their way.
Doesn't taste good and they're too fucking crunchy.
We knew it. The news mentioned Sherry Lynn Avenue, and we know that's where his sister lives. We were worried for them.
Just forcing myself to eat the shit.
So where do you go now?
Sherry Lynn Avenue. That's where we're living with Cindy and David Fugate. He's a firefighter.
And you hope to stay with relatives. And thank you so much, Leslie. And you were wrote it out with your pets too. Your little dogs for them as well.
We would love it if insurance companies could step up and let us know when something like this happens, where the humans can go to stay and where they can take their animals.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for talking to us. We really do appreciate it. Good luck to you and your husband.
Thank you.
Try to recover from this. Steph and Allie, the governor is expected to tour this area in just a short time. Thank you, Lisa. Shelters have been opened for residents like her that are now trying to figure out what's next. But crews are still assessing the damage here throughout this entire area and other communities throughout the Midwest. Some parts of Indiana hit especially hard as well. But the cleanup effort well underway here in Ohio. Pass back to you.
Well underway. This has been days and weeks since deluge. Let's bring in Carrie Sanders in Sand Spring, Oklahoma, which has been experiencing devastating flooding, and it's not ending. It's not lightening up anytime soon. Carrie,
I have free napkins from work.
Okay, so you see over my shoulder here, this is the Keystone Dam on the Arkansas River. It's controlling the flow of the water as it waves closer. So we'll do a little bit of mathematics here. Right now, there's 275,000.
Okay. Prem Lama, good night, sir. Or ma'am, whoever you are. Just got a phone call. She's gonna be calling me back in just a second. But I wanted to come back on here and let you know before I wound up on the phone for an hour. My new roommate buddy. Who I might wind up in a relationship with if it wasn't for the fact that I'm emotionally unavailable for a relationship. So she's going to be calling me back in just a few minutes after she loads the groceries in her house. She just called me while she was driving. But, yeah, so I'll have somebody here to help pay bills at least. And maybe keep me from being so damn lonely all the time. Her name is Karma. And like Mr. Conway said, you can't make this shit up. I'm gonna go from Kira to Karma. I kind of imagine myself hooking up with her just because, like, she's available and she likes me. You know? It's pretty much the only standard I have to meet right now. Somebody knows how to take care of themselves and is honest. Honest with themselves. Kira wasn't really honest with herself, man. That's why she hates me so much. She can never pray for acceptance, pray for God's will to be done. Pray for the strength to improve her own life. Never wanted to pray with me. Except for when it came to her playing the part. Seems like all she ever did was play the part, though. Yeah, definitely no patience. Didn't want to pray for patience. Didn't want to pray for anything. Just mentally at war with God, basically. Look at me smoking one of these cigarettes like they're satisfying. But anyways, if it cuts off again, that's because I'm going to be on the phone for a little while. So, like, just check back later, I guess. I'm going to leave the stream going, but it'll just be buffering. Because I can't, like, switch back and forth.
So if the earth were to break through, the water would rush in. So these levees down in Tulsa, about 7 miles long,
Oklahoma's having some record flash flooding.
and they have never been tested the way they're being tested right now. Back in 86,
All right, brother, take it easy, man. Really good to see you again. Hope you can stop by more often.
Over here, you can see people have all gathered over here. They're
I missed you.
They're looking at something, quite frankly, that they haven't seen before, which is this much water flowing. But of course, they're concerned that that water could become a problem. I've already seen areas where the water has come over the banks, gone into neighborhoods, and flooded neighborhoods. Residents who have lost.
I hope you do well at your new construction job, man. I hope they put you in charge. They ought
They
to.
had the right insurance, but it turns out, Stephanie, they had homeowners insurance, not federal flood insurance, and so they're getting some really rude awakenings, which ultimately means that they're going to have to get some help from the federal government through FEMA, but ultimately get a low interest loan from the Small Business Administration.
You know, on the one hand, I feel like a delusional dick for trying to have so many lofty dreams about my life. On the other hand, it's like, I'm crippled, so what the hell else could I have done? Kind of win all or lose nothing. Win it all or lose everything.
Fear of more tornadoes. So guys, everybody's
I'll end up losing everything.
Where there's expected to be a tornado watch in effect.
But let's make something clear. If the best they can hope for is a low interest loan, that's something they're going to be paying back for years. If they think they're going to be paid out by insurance, they don't think they're going to owe money on that. They think they've been paying premiums for years and years, so they will then be covered. A loan is something entirely different and devastating to these people.
And Stephanie, it's so confusing because the federal flood insurance program, again, federal, you actually get it from your insurance agent. So when he comes up to you, he's like, would you like flood insurance? Sometimes the mortgage company says, the bank says you got to have flood insurance depending where you live. But it's confusing to most people. Like, well, I don't think I really need that unless it's required. And then they don't buy it, and they think, well, I'm buying it from the same guy who sold me my homeowner's insurance. But it's a different policy. It's a federal government policy, and you don't go to your homeowner's insurance and say, hey, all of this water wound up in my neighborhood. It's up to my roof. Everything's destroyed. Help me. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry. That's a flood. That is not necessarily like a pipe breaking your house and you having water damage, which would be covered by homeowner's insurance. It's just an ugly truth that a lot of people are quite now discovering right now. You know it is.
Yeah, Kerry, thank you for your reporting. That's the hard part about this. When you don't know it's coming and it happens, you don't know what happens next. And for a lot of people,
you think you're covered.
You think you're covered, and you don't have, the money to engage in the repairs that are necessary for businesses, for individuals. It's devastating.
This is why people feel like they get scammed by insurance. They think they're paying into something year after year because in the event of an emergency, they'll be covered. And then that emergency happens, you pick up the phone and they go, no, ma'am, it's something entirely different.
All right, well, right now in Oklahoma, the first state trial of the opioid epidemic is underway. This marks the first major test of whether states can hold drug makers accountable for fueling the opioid crisis.
In court today, Johnson & Johnson faces a multi-billion-dollar civil lawsuit by the state aimed at their alleged deceptive marketing campaigns.
and it is just the start of more than 2,000 similar lawsuits against opioid manufacturers across the nation. Joining us now, MSNBC legal analyst Danny Zavala.
Just be clear that we were showing Johnson & Johnson baby powder. That's a different case altogether. That has nothing to do with this whatsoever. So.
This is about opioids. Danny, the argument here is that the company underrepresented how addictive and dangerous these drugs are, and they overrepresented what they can do for you, how people should take them, and it led to this epidemic.
That's right, and the company's defense is going to be, look, we have these marketing materials. They were approved by the FDA. The product is completely legal, and the plaintiffs here cannot show, this is going to be the defense argument, the plaintiffs cannot show causation. They can't show that these advertisements caused a doctor with his or her independent judgment to write a script, and that script caused a person to then become an addict. Was it part of the chain of events that led?
How does that get established legally? Because yeah, it was part of a chain of events that had doctors prescribing things, and associations recommending that pain go to zero, and companies marketing it, and distributors sending way too many drugs to individual pharmacies. How does that legally work when there's a chain of which Johnson & Johnson was a part?
It's going to be complicated here, and the plaintiffs are taking a novel theory of public nuisance and an ambitious theory of causation, saying that merely by marketing this and not warning everyone about the risks and the dangers that
brushed my teeth.
Legally caused, which means you have to actually cause it, and it must also be foreseeable that this would be the result, that this caused people to become addicted and for overdoses to result. And again, the defense is going to be, look, the FDA approved this. There's nothing that we did to cause the addiction, and most importantly, this drug is not only legal, it does have a benefit. It has a recognized health benefit, unlike, for example, tobacco, which has zero health benefit.
But is the FDA aware or monitoring the volume in terms of distribution? If you're Johnson & Johnson, you know when creating these drugs, you created them because you understood a finite number of patients that would potentially need to receive drugs at this time. Fast forward, you're seeing countless prescriptions get filled. Are there no consequences? Is there no requirement on the part of Johnson & Johnson to raise a red flag and say, hold on a second, why are 20 times the amount of what we believe should be the amount of people receiving this drug? Why are there multiple of that out there? If there's no consequence to that?
You've raised a really powerful moral argument. The question is this a legal theory for holding the company liable, where you have several different, as we call in the law, intervening causation events happening in between to cut off potentially the causation chain? Is it enough to hold the drug companies liable simply because the product is very dangerous? You can apply that same theory to cars. Cars are incredibly dangerous items.
What if suddenly everyone's buying them?
Well, not only that, the car companies, not only they manufacture them, they promote them, they advertise them, knowing that thousands and thousands of people die. Well, the reality is this. Society has made a balancing test, and they've decided that the social benefit of cars outweighs